Aisha, how are you?
I'm very well. That made me
geared
laugh
up for your great show?
Can't wait. I love that thing about you wiping off someone's chocolate. I can so see you doing that as well. People going, no!
I do it all the time with Michael Gove.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio. It starts with listening.
Good afternoon. It's just gone 1 o'clock. You're listening to Aisha Hazarika. This is Times Radio. It's the battle for the heart and soul of the Labour Party. Tony Blair, Wes Streeting and Keir Starmer have all published essays this week, and today it's the turn of Andy Burnham. How many essays do we need? But pressure is also growing for an inquiry into the SNP after all that money was embezzled by Peter Murrell, as his estranged wife Nicola Sturgeon insists that he lied to her. And my big interview at 2 o'clock is with the former top lawyer at the FBI, Andrew Weissman. He'll tell me why politicians who tell lies should feel the full force of the law. And in my peer-to-peer section, I'll be catching up with Lord Burns, Terry Burns, former chair of Channel 4 and Ofcom. So we've got lots to get through, but first let's catch up with Ellie J for all the latest news.
Thanks, Aisha. Good afternoon. Romania's defence ministry says there was no real opportunity to shoot down a Russian drone before it hit an apartment building in the eastern city of Galați. 2 people were injured in the attack. It's believed the devices were being used to target Ukraine's border regions. Romania, which is a NATO member, has called the incident a serious violation of international law, and NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte says the alliance stands ready to defend every inch of its territory. The Deputy Commander of Romania's Joint Forces Command is Gheorghe Maxim.
All available data has already been analysed to establish the exact sequence of events, and it resulted in the fact that there were no real opportunities to engage it safely. I want to convey very clearly that the situation is under control. We are not facing an attack on Romania. We are instead facing the effects of a conflict taking place right next to our border.
2 brothers accused of assaulting a police officer at Manchester Airport 2 years ago won't face a third trial. Mohammed Fahir Ahmad, who's 21, and 26-year-old Mohammed Ahmad were accused of using a high level of violence to cause actual bodily harm to PC Zachary Marsden in an incident that went viral on social media. Both men denied the charge, telling Liverpool Crown Court they acted in self-defence or in defence of each other. The government will announce today that 300,000 new work experience and training placements are to be made available for young people over the next 3 years. It comes as the number of the UK's 16 to 24-year-olds not in employment, education or training increased to more than 1 million, the highest figure since 2013. But the programme is facing questions over its viability. The Times' Andy Sylvester says it's difficult to understand how the government can assign so many people to work placements that don't appear to exist.
In hospitality alone, one of the sectors in which he's talking about creating these work placements, there are hundreds of thousands fewer jobs now than there were a couple of years ago, because national insurance went up, because energy costs went up, and because business rates went up. Even if this 300,000 programme works, of which there is scepticism, he is only undoing the damage done elsewhere by the government.
2 people were scheduled to appear in court today in connection with the fatal shooting of a woman in Sheffield. Shanice Brooks, who was 30, was shot dead outside the 141 bar in the early hours of Monday. Kent County Council says it will step up public scrutiny of water supply, quality and infrastructure following a series of water outages in recent days. People in parts of the county are being warned that disruption to their supply could continue over the weekend. South East Water said its reservoirs have reached a critical level after 8,000 properties in Whitstable were left without running water. Jeff Higgins relies on water for his jam-making business. He says a lack of production since Tuesday has already cost him up to £15,000.
We've had the team redirected to do packing and labelling, things that we could do. We've now run out of things to do. We can't do anything about it. You know, they can't take their holidays because they're already allocated, so we have to pay them and they have to go home.
Now let's get the latest from the markets.
Times Radio Market Watch in association with Eden Tree Investment Management. Investing for a better tomorrow. Search Eden Tree to find out more. Capital at risk.
The FTSE 100 is up 25 points at 10,451, while the FTSE 250 is up 161 points at 23,486. The pound's trading at €1.15 and at $1.34. And the Governor of the Bank of England says allowing inflation to remain above target levels for a period is appropriate in the face of uncertainty and weakness in the economy. Addressing a conference in Reykjavik, Andrew Bailey says reacting too early to inflation concerns may generate undesirable volatility. You can get plenty more on the business section of the Times website.
Times Radio Market Watch in association with Eden Tree Investment Management. Dedicated to sustainable investing. Search Eden Tree to find out more. Capital at risk.
Across the UK. On DAB Digital Radio. On the free Times Radio app. Online. And on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Good afternoon and welcome to Times Radio this lunchtime with me, Aisha Hazarika. I hope you have had a great week. We have got lots to get through. It's been such a busy week from a news point of view and from a politics point of view, particularly if you're into Labour politics. My goodness, you wait all this time for one essay and you don't just get one, you get sort of three. Now the fourth essay is on the scene today. It started with Tony Blair, then we had Wes Streeting, then we had Keir Starmer. Today it's the turn of Andy Burnham. But of course, underlying this sort of essay crisis, which is a metaphor and feels quite literal as well for the Labour Party, is of course a bigger question, which I think Tony Blair has hit on. I didn't agree with lots that he had in his piece, but I think he is right to say you do have to have a conversation about the soul of the Labour Party, the philosophy of the Labour Party and the direction of the Labour Party. And that's what everybody is trying to do. So we're going to try and kind of unpick that throughout the show. We've got lots of other big stories to talk about, including the SNP, lots of geopolitics as well. And my big guest at 2:00 is a fascinating guy called Andrew Weissman. He's a former FBI bigwig, and he is now kind of dedicating his life to trying to clean up politics and to try and get politicians who lie to face some kind of scandal, some kind of justice or some kind of sanction. So he is very interesting. We're also going to be doing a piece looking at Britain's fugitives. We talk a lot about the creaking criminal justice system. We've spoken a lot about early release and about overcrowding in prisons and things like crimes like shoplifting not adequately being prosecuted. Well, now there's a really interesting investigation by Channel 4 Dispatches, and it is basically telling the story of how the justice system is allowing thousands of people to just dodge court appearances. It's called Hunting Britain's Fugitives, and it's found that there's nearly 60,000 criminal suspects that have skipped court. So we're going to be digging into that. And then we've got lots after 3:00, and my peer-to-peer guest is going to be Lord Terry Burns. He's the former chair of Channel 4, and he was also the former chair of Ofcom as well. And my political panel is Anne McElvoy and Ava Santina Evans. So yeah, we have got lots to get through. And very interested in getting your comments as well. You can text 87222. Start your message with the word Times. You can WhatsApp us 0333 003 2353. Of course, you can tweet us at Times Radio. And very interested to get your thoughts on all these big stories, particularly the kind of essay crisis that the Labour Party finds itself in. You know, whose essay? Have you read any of them? Are you interested in any of them? Do you think this is all navel-gazing, or do you think this is important kind of intellectual due diligence and heavy lifting that is necessary if the Labour Party needs to kind of shape up? Now, speaking of which, let's touch and have a look on at Andy Burnham's essay. Now, his is out today, and he has blamed 40 years of neoliberalism and Thatcherite policy for failing Britain and leaving mainstream politics close to collapse. Now, his comments are slightly shorter than Tony Blair's. Tony Blair's was 5,700. Andy Burnham's is just a snip at that, 1,500. It's published in today's Times. It's well worth a read. Now, remember, Tony Blair criticised the government's policies over workers' rights, net zero and non-dom rules taxing the rich. Andy Burnham has very much pushed back against this. He's described his Burnham politics as business-friendly socialism. Andy Burnham is arguing that economic growth can only be delivered through strong public control and direction, and that governments can no longer leave it to the market. And in fact, on the cover of the Times say the splashes Burnham backs state control in blast at Blair. So you've got Tony Blair, who was a big fan of a sort of more mixed economy, much more sort of private sector involvement, things like PFI, private finance initiatives. Andy Burnham is very much saying, no, we should have the state kind of taking back control of things. Well, let's speak now with Yoshi Herman, who is a journalist and founder of the Manchester Mill, which is a brilliant publication and site which covers all things Manchester. And he's been a real student of Andy Burnham. He wrote a brilliant piece this week kind of dissecting Andy Burnham's politics. I'm just delighted he joins us now. Yoshi, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much.
So what do you make of Andy Burnham's comeback?
Well, I mean, I've been following him on the Mill in Manchester for 6 years now. He is a politician who I think is extremely talented when it comes to communication. And he is a politician who has I think, fairly fuzzy agenda, a fairly fuzzy idea of like what it is he wants to do at a sort of broader level. So I think watching him campaign in Makerfield and watching him kind of try to lay out a bit of a national programme has been interesting. I mean, I read his piece in the Times today, his essay. It wasn't quite essay length, was it? Sort of well short of Tony Blair's length. But it lays out some things that I do associate with him, but it also kind of lays out some things that I think might be slightly wishful thinking.
So what are the things that you think have merit?
Well, I mean, the one that comes across as like very much Burnham, I think this is the one thing that I think he really is kind of committed to is the devolution stuff. I mean, he talks about a huge transfer of power, resources and personnel out of Whitehall and down to the kind of combined authority level and the local authority level. You know, he has been a beneficiary of devolution. It is in Greater Manchester as a devolved mayor that he's kind of rebuilt his political career. And I think he really does believe that a lot more decisions should be made locally. So it'll be really interesting to see what he can actually do on that. He's talked about kind of local control of kind of technical education. So areas choose what it is that young people learn. So it's appropriate to local employers. That is something that he has started to push through in Greater Manchester. So that makes complete sense. I think the bit of the essay where you might say there is a question mark would be, you know, he talks about this kind of place first mentality whereby you have a collaborative local politics and different parties work together to create a kind of stable, collaborative platform. You know, that does kind of work in Greater Manchester, but it's mainly worked because Labour was so dominant. For most of his time as mayor, almost all of the local authorities in Greater Manchester were led by a Labour leader and had a Labour majority on the council. And right now, he is talking about getting back to Westminster. He is trying to get back to Westminster, where it's much more difficult to imagine that kind of cross-party collaborative decision-making. He is going to be criticised, barracked from all sides, and he's not going to be able to reach across the aisle in the same way that he has done in Greater Manchester. So I think that is a potential weakness of that essay.
And, you know, he's very much credited in Manchester, as you say, of being quite cross-party. I mean, I was at a big business event a couple of months ago and I was quite struck by how positive the mood was. I mean, this was pre any kind of election chatter and Makerfield and pre-local elections. So this wasn't on the agenda, but I was quite taken aback by how many local business people I spoke to, many of whom were Conservative voters and Conservative supporters. A couple of people there also Reform, people saying actually he is somebody that we can do business with, and he isn't you know, madly tribal as a mayor. And I think that's one of the things that sort of appeals to him. But you're saying that might be difficult in Westminster. But I suppose his supporters would say, shouldn't shouldn't he be allowed to try that? Because one of the things that people do get very frustrated about in Westminster is the tribalism of it. And of course, there's the realpolitik, but a lot more business could be done if there was cross-party working.
Oh, definitely. I mean, a hell of a lot more could be done. And I think the British public would love politicians to be less tribal and to be more collaborative, like they are in other countries. And I think Burnham would also love that to be the case, because I think he is someone who likes people to be on board with him. He likes affirmation. He likes people to like him. He is a very talented kind of knocker together of heads. He can get lots of different agencies in a room and get things done. And he's good when people work like that. You're right that lots of people in the business community here really like him. But remember, he hasn't just spent 8 years as mayor talking about the failed Thatcherite consensus. I mean, this is relatively new. I don't remember a lot of speeches where he talked about how the evils of neoliberalism. He has overseen a city that has been sort of capitalist red in tooth and claw, a city that has desperately tried to get private development money from basically anywhere he can get it. I mean, Greater Manchester has not been a model for sort of, I don't know, whatever he's saying, municipal socialism. Even the buses, yes, they are under public control, but they're not publicly owned. They're still, London-style franchising system. So how well his relationship with business will continue if he's talking about business in that way, we'll have to see. But this is a relatively new thing, which is why in my piece I said I don't think there is a Burnhamism. I mean, people are desperate to look for one. But the things he's saying now in this campaign frankly diverge quite a lot from the mood music of his mayoralty and also the kind of principles that have made Manchester really successful. So this is a bit of a new thing, I think.
It's so interesting you say that, because certainly from the people I spoke to who were absolutely not socialists at all. They were proud capitalists and wanting to do very well. A lot of them were sort of SMEs, a lot of them in tech and areas like that. And as I said, they were really heaping praise on Andy Burnham and the kind of very pro-business vibe that there is around Manchester in the northwest. In fact, people are citing it. It's a great growth story. And yet he says his argument is that he wants to have business-friendly socialism. I mean, what do you think he means by that? Does that mean let 1,000 flowers bloom in terms of businesses, as I have done in Manchester, but make sure that you reap some of those rewards to do good public investment things like the buses?
I don't really know what he means. I think it's incumbent on whoever interviews him on camera next to try and get a bit more detail on what he really means. So you're talking about the last 40 years being a disaster and a mistake. And the last 40 years have been the kind of pro-business Thatcherite, Blairite period, right, since the 1970s. So he's
Although
talking
you could
about
argue that Brexit hasn't been great for business.
You could definitely argue that, but you could also argue that Andy Burnham isn't exactly sure what he wants to do when it comes to the relationship with the European Union, because that's changed a lot recently. I'm not kind of just doing him down. I mean, I've been covering for him a long time, and I think he has wonderful talents. And the reason I wrote my piece in the way I did is because I really want people to understand that there is a real, genuine kind of values-based core to Burnham, and that he's a good guy, I think, fundamentally. But I think there is a real mess developing when it comes to what his agenda is. The things that he's advocating in this essay in the Times today are really notably divergent from the Greater Manchester philosophy, and that was a philosophy that he inherited. So you could argue, well, he inherited that from a previous kind of the people who ran the city,
like Howard Bernstein and people like that.
Yeah, so Richard Lees and Sir Howard Bernstein were kind of these figures who were uber pragmatic. If the Tories were in government, they'd work with the Tories. If Labour was in government, work with Labour. They did some Labour things, but they did also a hell of a lot of kind of just like very pragmatic things to get money flowing into the city. And they also built a lot. They were very, very, very pro-building. To hear Andy Burnham on the campaign trail this week kind of sounding notes of caution about sort of greenbelt development in Macclesfield, I mean, maybe that's what you need to do to win, but that's not Manchesterism. Manchesterism is get all the blockers out of the way so we can build as much as possible. So there's just a lot of contradictions here that need to be worked out, and maybe they will be. Maybe there'll come a moment where clarity emerges.
Sure, and I mean, look, to be fair, it does feel like sometimes there is a bit of a double standard in the sense that, Labour, we obviously dissect Labour policy in great detail, and they're the governing party, and that's right. There are other parties who do not get a lot of scrutiny on quite big policy things like reform, for example, and it's all vibes. And we do live in quite a kind of vibe-fueled political landscape, particularly with social media. Final question to you, Yoshi. I mean, how do you think Andy Burnham fares on the kind of in the sort of vibe economy? Because obviously that's something that Keir Starmer has really struggled with. He has struggled in terms of being able to articulate how he feels, making an emotional connection with people, particularly through the medium of social media. I mean, Andy Burnham's supporters will say, look, you show me another politician that got cheered at the Brit Awards. You know, I was at an event with loads of like comedians last night. They're like slagging off all politicians, but actually, like Andy Burnham, comes across as a good guy. How do you think he'll fare on that side of things?
Oh, he's a total winner on the vibe side. There's no doubt about that. If you want vibes, you got the right guy. I mean, he's an unbelievable communicator. He also comes across as much more authentic to people than most politicians. I mean, he just seems more normal. I've seen him, you know, on local question times, you know, in different bits of Greater Manchester. He's really good at talking to people, even, you know, up against kind of opposition. There's no doubt about that. If you want, you know, if it's vibes based, it's 100% him. I think he's, you know, where things get less strong would be when you have to delineate your programme. I don't think that's the kind of guy he is. And I think in order to be a good Prime Minister, he would need to have an unbelievable team around him so that he can do the vibes, but also the kind of emotional leadership. I think he's really, really good at that. And he'd need to have people around him who are like very, very, very sure of the programme that they want to follow.
Yeah, well, look, Yoshi, always great to catch up with you. Thank you very much for your time. That's Yoshi Herman, who is the journalist and founder of Manchester Mill. And it is really worth reading Josie's piece from earlier this week about Andy Burnham. I'll just read through the list of Makerfield candidates. Jake Austin, Liberal Democrats, Count Binface Party, Andy Burnham, the Labour Party, Dan Clark, the Libertarian Party, John Dyer, Independent, Ed Gemmell, Climate Party, Paul Gould, Independent, Alan Howling, Lord Hope, the official monster raving loony party, Robert Kenyon, Reform UK, Robert Pownall, Protect the Wild, Rebecca Shepherd, Restore Britain, Sarah Wakefield, Green Party, Peter Ward, Rejoin EU, and Michael Winstanley, the Conservative Party. Loads of you are messaging in. I will get through some of your comments. Do keep them coming in. A really interesting range of views coming in from you guys at home. But it's just gone 1:21. You're listening to Aisha Hazarika on Times Radio.
Global events.
There are real worries about security, about human rights.
Keeping you informed as events unfold.
We are going to be asking a question that would have been unimaginable 48 hours ago.
Reactive analysis.
The scandal here is that of misconduct in a public office. That's the claim here.
From the world's best journalists.
This is what you get. Big thoughts from people with big brains.
On DAB, online, on the app, and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
In a world of noise and uncertainty, IG is the investment platform that backs you. Take our flexible stocks ISA, which gives you the freedom to withdraw funds anytime and replace them in the same tax year, all without losing your £20,000 tax-free allowance. And if that's not enough, pay no commission on your stocks, shares and ETFs when you invest with IG. IG. Trade, invest, progress. Your capital's at risk. Other fees may apply. Tax treatment depends on individual circumstances and is subject to change.
AI is only as powerful as the platform it's built into. That's why it's no surprise that more than 85% of the Fortune 500 use the ServiceNow AI platform. While other platforms duct tape tools together, ServiceNow seamlessly unifies people, data, workflows, and AI, connecting every corner of your business. And with AI agents working together autonomously, anyone in any department can focus on the work that matters most. Learn how ServiceNow puts AI to work for people at servicenow.co.uk.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker, this is Times Radio.
Welcome back. Right, so many messages are coming in. Stuart says, as Bernard Ingham said, God save me from politicians who want to be liked. Oh, Stuart, they all do want to be liked, I can tell you that as a fact. David says, everyone loved Nick Clegg once. Burnham is U-turning all over the place. Handyman says, surely you mean he's a believable communicator, or at least an unbelievably believable communicator. That would be believably accurate. And Frank says, grant and subsidy-based businesses will always support politicians who stuff their mouths full of gold. The rest of us will have to compete against these subsidy junkies. And Mary says, Burnham blames Thatcher and the sale of council houses for the shortage of housing. But this is to avoid the fact that over 10 million people have been allowed to come here and live here without the consent of the British people. I think both things can be true at the same time, Mary. I think not replacing the housing stock was a problem. I think people coming here and there not being enough housing is also a problem. I think you make a fair point. Also, building insufficient houses is also a point. Scott says, hello Aisha, Blair's intervention is welcome in my view. However, whatever people think of him now, winning 3 general elections speaks for itself. Labour succeeds when it occupies the centre ground, not the fringes, and that kind of pragmatic, reformist approach is exactly what's needed. Again, for me, Burnham comes across as a political weather vane with lovely eyelashes. I just do not think he is the answer. Well, look, such an interesting range of views. Do keep them coming. I'm really interested to know what you think about all of these essays that are coming through. Well, look, let's now turn our attention to a huge scandal in Scotland, and that, of course, is Peter Murrell, the former chief executive of the SNP and estranged husband of Nicola Sturgeon, who this week pled guilty in the High Court to embezzling over £400,000 of party funds over a 12-year period, and an extraordinary list of items. You know, obviously there's the motorhome that everybody knows about, but incredibly strange things like luxury pens, olive oil, very expensive salt and pepper grinders, a onesie, and I think my favourite, 2 hairdryers, which is interesting for a man that has no hair. But anyway, it's a huge scandal, and the First Minister, John Swinney, claims that this was just the rogue action of one man, but opposition parties have a different story. They say it exposes a culture of secrecy and cover-ups at the top of the Scottish establishment. I mean, that is also a view, it should be said, that people like Joanna Cherry has. She's a former SNP MP. Now, critics are asking the question, what knowledge did Nicola Sturgeon have of these crimes? But speaking to Times Radio this morning, Ian Blackford, he's the former SNP Westminster leader, was adamant that she knew nothing about it.
What's at the root of this is one individual that has behaved in a way which is, he's now criminally responsible for his actions and the fraud that took place. Nicola, as the First Minister, in no way, shape or form was responsible for the actions of Peter Murrell.
Nicola Sturgeon has said that this has been the worst week of my life. Well, joining me now is somebody who is asking for more answers. Jackie Bailey, who is the Deputy Leader of the Scottish Labour Party. Jackie, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon.
What do you think's gone on here, and how much do you think Nicola Sturgeon knows?
Well, this has been a deception that's been going on for at least a decade. And what is fascinating for me is that the SNP's own internal mechanisms simply failed to identify this. And that's despite the effort of at least 6 SNP members who are members of the National Executive Committee, the highest body in the SNP, asking repeatedly questions about the finances, about where the money's gone, and not being given answers, and resigning, 6 of them en masse, to try and illustrate the point. So people have been suspicious and worried about where the money has gone. Nobody, I think, thought for a minute that it was being embezzled, just that it had been misspent, maybe perhaps on the general election rather than the independence referendum. But what the SNP does, which they do so well, is they cover it up. There's no transparency. It's all about secrecy, and it's all about denying their own members the opportunity to question them. We even have Nicola Sturgeon on camera telling them not to question the finances at the point where Peter Murrell was embezzling that money directly from the party. So I have to say, using a modicum of common sense, if something like bags of goods from Harrods or Fortnum and Mason or all these high-end shops that they were shopping in suddenly came into my house, I would be asking questions about it. You know, if a motorhome appeared in my mother-in-law's drive, I would be asking questions about it, given that I think she's 90 years of age and unlikely to be investing in a motorhome herself. A Jaguar car appearing on my front drive, I would be asking questions about it. And it is extraordinary that a woman who is so over the detail of things, so micromanaging of both the party and her government, simply fails to see what's going on under her nose, is stretching people's credulity. But this is a huge scandal, and we think there should be a parliamentary inquiry.
I mean, lots of people are saying, well, certainly her supporters are saying she was investigated by the police. This is obviously a very thorough police investigation that has been carried out. And, you know, now we have Peter Murrell pleading guilty. The police let her go without pressing any further charges or asking any further questions. Peter Murrell is now in custody and he faces sentencing next month. Why do you feel there needs to be an additional inquiry if the police have done their job?
So firstly, I'm not questioning what the police have done at all. The inquiry would be separate to that. We aren't here to examine the criminality. But I should point out that Nicola Sturgeon did indeed say she was cooperating with the police. And I understand she undertook a 7-hour interview after she was arrested, in which she said repeatedly, no comment. That was all she said. I don't really consider that cooperation. But a parliamentary inquiry wouldn't look to re-litigate what the police are doing, but there are issues we need to understand. Like, for example, why did it take 5 years for a police investigation? Why did it cost taxpayers over £2 million? Because they are also the victims in this, not just the people who donated money to the SNP. Why was there any delay with the Crown Office not acting on the recommendations of the police? You know, we need to understand that.
So do you think there's been political interference in the sort of criminal justice system of this? And do you think there was political interference in the decision to delay this case until after the elections in Holyrood?
So I have to say it is convenient that, you know, the date of the court appearance was delayed until after the election, and you cannot help but think that there is something rather amiss.
So do you think there's questions for Dorothy? Do you think there's questions for Dorothy Bain, who's the Advocate General?
I think we do need to examine the role of the Lord Advocate, but not the individual, because I have great admiration for Dorothy Bain. But it is the law officers recused themselves, but the Crown Office itself will have still operated. Why did the Crown Office agree to a delay when they've spent 5 years preparing a case? Surely they were prepared to be in court. So this is something a parliamentary inquiry would rightly consider. And to be frank, if John Swinney and the SNP have nothing to hide, then they have nothing to fear from a parliamentary inquiry. And you will know, you know, and your listeners will know, that trust in politics is at an all-time low. Anything that restores that trust, that shows how the organs of the state have operated, brings it into the light of day and is open and transparent, starts the process of restoring trust. And I think that's critically important.
Do you think if this case had been heard before the election, that it could have changed the outcome of the election?
I think this has had enormous cut through. I've never heard people talking so much about a set of salt and pepper grinders at £2,600. You know, this is just so alien to people's everyday life that they are all talking about it and frankly all quite shocked and disgusted by it. I don't know whether it would have affected the outcome. I think it might have made a difference in quite a few seats. But nevertheless, what's more important is that we understand what happened, that we have this parliamentary inquiry, and John Swinney's excuse that, oh, well, we've won an election, there's no need to scrutinise us, is just complete and arrant nonsense, and very arrogant and very complacent.
Thank you very much for your time, Jackie. That's Jackie Baillie, who's Deputy Leader of the Scottish Labour Party. I mean, the list of items is quite it's like an Argos catalogue, sort of looking through some of the list of things. Right, we've got plenty more to come. We are going to be focusing on what's been happening in Romania, Putin's body double, and also plans for a national care service seem to have maybe been put on hold. But it's just gone 1:33. Let's catch up with Ellie J for all the latest headlines.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, Aisha. Good afternoon. The Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has said that Russia's violation of NATO airspace is extremely dangerous and reckless. 2 people were injured when 2 drones from Moscow hit a block of flats in Romania in the eastern region of Galat near the Ukrainian border. Ukraine's calling for decisive action against Russia. NATO has vowed to bolster its defences and called the actions reckless. Here's Michael Evans, former defence editor of The Times, speaking to Times Radio.
It's not the first time, but what makes this more serious is that this wasn't a surveillance drone that happened to get out of direction and hit an apartment block. This was a weapon system, a drone with explosives on board. So it clearly did a lot more damage than it would have done if it had not been armed.
2 brothers accused of assaulting police at Manchester Airport will not face a third retrial. Mohammed Fahir Amaz and Mohammed Ahmad from Rochdale both denied attacking a male officer in July 2024. Jurors had been unable to reach verdicts in 2 previous trials. 2 people have been charged with the murder of 30-year-old mum Shanice Brooks, who was shot in Sheffield city centre. It happened outside a bar early Monday morning. People in parts of Kent are being warned that disruption to their water supply could continue over the weekend. Kent County Council says it will step up public scrutiny following a series of water outages, and South East Water said its reservoirs have reached a critical level. And for a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on the Times Radio app.
This is Times Radio.
There is a certain pleasure in travelling well, in exploring the world deeply at your own pace. With Oceania Cruises, sail aboard intimate, luxurious ships to the most captivating destinations and savour the finest cuisine at sea in an adults-only atmosphere. Because true luxury is about meaning, not excess. Learn more at oceanacruises.com or contact your travel advisor. Oceania Cruises, your world, your way.
McDonald's breakfast is turning up the heat with a spicy new twist. Calm down, not that spicy. Breakfast is for savouring, not suffering. Introducing McDonald's breakfast with Frank's Red Hot Ketchup. A spicy breakfast, suitable for the morning. Until 8th of June, served until 11 a.m, subject to availability.
The best way to listen to Prime Minister's questions is PMQ's Unpacked, Wednesdays at noon with Hugo Rifkind.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker, this is Times Radio.
Welcome back. Lots of comments coming in on Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP. I will get through some of those in a moment, but I just want to focus on a very important story. And this, of course, was a drone crashing into an apartment block in Romania. Now, NATO's Secretary-General Mark Rutte says that the alliance stands ready to defend every inch of Allied territory after that drone crash. Now, Romania, which is a member of NATO, has accused Russia of a serious violation of international law and has asked the Alliance for Anti-Drone Technology. Yvette Cooper, the Foreign Secretary, has said that the UK strongly condemns the incident and said that Russia's violation of NATO airspace is extremely dangerous and reckless. And she added that the UK stands united with Romania and all allies to defend every inch of NATO territory. Well, let's now speak with Kurt Volker, former US ambassador to NATO. Kurt, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
What is your reaction to this drone attack?
Well, several things. First off, it's not the first time that a drone has gone into NATO territory and not the first time that it has hit something. Fortunately, no one was killed today, but we did have someone killed previously in Poland. And the bottom line is Russia needs to stop this war. There would not be drones flying around and missiles flying around if Russia stopped the war. And so we need to keep up the pressure for Russia to end it, not just say, okay, we're here, don't do this anymore, we'll defend our territory. We have to get Russia to stop the war.
And how do you think we expedite that? Because it does feel like we are in this impasse now. And of course, there's a lot of attention being taken up in the Middle East at the moment with this, war with Iran. What do you think could be done to get a resolution on this?
Well, there are several things, and some are being done, but also more can be done. First off, on the positive side, there is the $90 billion loan from the European Union to Ukraine, which will finance, in part, more military support for Ukraine. That's good. There's the military assistance that countries are providing, like Germany, like the UK, which is very important. We have not done a good enough job on starving the Kremlin of finances for this war. That would be oil and gas sanctions, cutting them off more quickly than we are currently planning to do, not going in for sanctions waivers, such as the Trump administration has done, and going after secondary sanctions on those who are evading the first layer, so that we really start to put more and more pressure on the Kremlin's finances.
And look, in terms of, this phrase that we're hearing, that NATO stands ready to defend every inch of Allied territory, I mean, that's very much at the heart of Article 50. Yep. What do you think, what's the line that needs to be crossed for Article 5 to be triggered?
Yeah. Well, first off, it's nice to say, we're going to defend every inch of NATO territory. Well, we just didn't. This drone flew in and hit an apartment building. So, let's be serious here. If we mean that, then we have to have a readiness level. We have to have anti-drone systems. We need to be coordinating airspace with Ukraine so we know what's flying. This is not there yet. Second, I think that the NATO leadership, NATO countries are right. This was not, in most likely scenario, was not a deliberate Russian attack on Romanian civilians. It was probably a drone that went off course or that hit something else. But that being said, as I started this conversation, we shouldn't accept that as an excuse. There shouldn't be any drones flying to begin with. And then I think, Article 5 would be invoked if Romania asked that from NATO because they felt they were deliberately being attacked by Russia. I don't think they feel that. I don't think that NATO countries would go along with that right now. But if this continues, where there's a pattern of Russian attacks on NATO territory, I think you will see Article 5 begin to be invoked.
Well, look, Kurt, always good to speak with you. Thank you very much for your time. That's Kurt Volker, former US ambassador to NATO. Right, let's read some of your messages out. Lisa has messaged in saying, hi, Aisha, Scott took the words right out of my WhatsApp. Totally agree. And this was Scott saying that people should listen to Tony Blair. She says, totally agree and would add the same applies to the Conservatives. However, are we centrists stuck in the past? ? The world has changed. Populists everywhere are gaining ground. How do we win again from the centre? ? It's a great question, Lisa. I mean, it's a brilliant question. It is a question that so many centrists are pondering, obviously, in the centre left, the centre right. I was speaking to David Gauck the other night. He's formed an interesting new kind of centre right think tank with people like Andy Streets and Ruth Davidson to do kind of centrist thinking for the Conservatives. But you're right, this is the sort of question of the day for centrists, because it does, to a lot of people, feel that sort of centrist politics has been a bit boring. It hasn't met the challenges of the last kind of 15 years. But, and as we were talking with Roshi, in a vibes-based economy, particularly in social media, people are quite seduced by the easy solutions with populism on the right and on the left. Loads of comments on the SNP. George says Nicola Sturgeon is pictured countless times with at least 2 Mont Blanc pens that are on Murrell's list. She even signed her resignation to the King using one. Leslie says that the SNP scandal, if the news had come out before the election, the SNP would have lost my local seat. That's what corruption looks like. And I have seen quite a lot of people actually saying that if they'd known about this scandal, they might not have voted for the SNP. And Mark's asked that question: what do we think about the decision to delay that case? And it's very damaging to the optics. Peter says Nicola earned a good salary, Murrell earned a good salary. They lived fairly modestly. They could have easily afforded the items he bought with party funds. It's completely plausible that Nicola did not suspect. And this is Peter from London, who says not a supporter. Phil says a thorough police investigation. She no commented and only later gave a less written response. She is misled to say she cooperated fully. And Scotty has got very strong views and says that he thinks there's been political interference, and that she's involved, and John Swinney is involved as well. But someone else says, look, maybe she was dealing with so much in public life and the stress that must involve. She just accepted what her husband said. After all, he should have been trusted and reliable. I do feel sorry for her, but at the same time find it hard to believe that she did not have suspicion. And Richard says more like Harrods than Argos. Yeah, maybe. I mean, some of the stuff is. Just somebody explain to me, how can salt and pepper grinders be more than £2,500? I just don't understand. Are they like massive? Are they like the size of it? I don't understand. Somebody explain that to me. I don't understand. Okay, right, we've got plenty more to come. Coming up next, we're going to be discussing plans for a national care service that it's been reported have been put on ice. It's just gone 1:44. You're listening to Aisha Hazarika on Times Radio.
From Tokyo to the Tadawal, Wall Street to Warsaw, and Chicago to the City of London, the global financial markets never sleep. Make sure you're fully briefed on all the latest money movements and share price fluctuations with Times Radio Business Bulletins.
Every morning on Times Radio, early breakfast from 5 a.m. and every night at Drive from 5 p.m.
Times Radio Business Bulletins, keeping you well informed throughout the day, every day.
Times Radio.
You're making decisions that matter to a lot of people. But what about your ideas? Ideas for what you want your money to do. Ideas that need the time and advice they've never been given. At RBC Wealth Management, with over 100 years of expertise, our advisors build plans around your ideas, not just your assets. Ideas happen here. Talk to us at RBC Wealth Management. Capital and any income from it is at risk.
I thought I'd seen it all, then felt myself awaken. I thought I'd witnessed beauty before my breath was taken. I thought that I'd known wonder, then sailed beneath these skies. I thought I'd seen the world until I opened my eyes. Change the way you see the world with HX Expeditions. Search Travel HX to discover more.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker, this is Times Radio.
Let's turn our attention to the issue of care. It's something which is, I think it's a real national disgrace that successive governments have failed to get a grip on what's incredibly important, and that, of course, is care. Now, today's Times newspaper has revealed that ministers are poised to abandon plans for a standalone national care service as part of Whitehall's bonfire of the Quangos. Leaked documents indicate that officials have ruled out creating an arm's-length body to oversee the reforms, despite it being a proposed part of Labour's overhaul of adult social care. And certainly, this idea of a national care service is something that the Labour Party's been talking about for a long, long time and was very popular with party members and popular with the public as well. Documents seen by The Times show that the Department of Health and Social Care agreed last month that an independent body was no longer being considered, but the decision has yet to be formally approved by ministers leading the Quango review. Let's now catch up with Simon Bottery, who's Senior Fellow of Social Care at the King's Fund. Simon, good afternoon. Welcome.
Yeah, good afternoon.
So what are you picking up about this kind of moving away from a national care service?
Well, I wouldn't get too excited about the fact that there are no plans for a standalone body to run a national care service. I don't think that's a significant issue at all. The real issue, frankly, is that the government hasn't defined what it means by a national care service. It didn't do that in its manifesto. In fact, it set up a commission with the job of telling them what a national care service would mean. So we are still some way from knowing what is meant by national care service. What do you and I get out of it? What do services look like? What sort of standards can we expect? How is it funded? None of those answers are clear at the moment, and that's what's delaying us from being able to move ahead with reform, not whether there's a standalone body or not.
And what does a national care service look like to you? What would an adequate national care service feel like?
Well, we should be doing what most other sort of developed countries have done. We're a real outlier, actually, compared to most other developed countries, and have a system whereby if you have a level of need, you will get some state support for that need for free. Now, you may not get all of the state support. You may have to contribute towards the cost of your individual care, but everybody with with a reasonable degree of need will get something from the state system. And that's not what we have at the moment. What we have at the moment is a system where if you have a high level of need, but you've got above a certain amount of assets, you'll get nothing from the state system. You'll be left to fend entirely by yourself.
And what's the way to solve this? Because, as you say, it's an issue which so many families are having to grapple with, and of course, you know, the very big decisions about selling the family home later on and all that stuff. What's the right way to do this in a way which is obviously fair to people that don't have a lot of means, but also doesn't have a cliff edge where everyone has to sell everything up, because a lot of people don't feel that's fair either.
Yeah, so I think some sort of system whereby if you have a certain level of need, you're entitled to a degree of state support, but you may have to contribute towards the overall costs depending on the amount of assets and income that you have at any one time. So that would be a fair system, and I think a lot of people would support that system. We've just nowhere near that at the moment. We have the Casey Commission in place, which will begin a national conversation fairly soon, which will be about trying to reach some sort of consensus about what it should look like and how we might fund it. And that'll, I think, be a really important process, which will maybe move us on a little bit towards actually getting this thing in place.
And Simon, why is this such a difficult issue for politicians to deal with? Because it's interesting, we're talking about Andy Burnham being back in the fray. Of course, when he was Health Secretary back in the day, there was an attempt to have cross-party talks. There was the Dilnot review. It all sort of fell apart. Why is it that this is such a difficult issue for governments to tackle?
Well, I think the fundamental reason is that it will cost money to invest in it. We will need to spend more money on it. But for most of us at this moment in time, we're not using adult social care. And actually, we try not to think about the fact that we may need to use it in the future. So it's not a real priority for us. And so when you ask people what are their big priorities, they'll talk about the economy, they'll talk about immigration, they'll talk about the NHS, but they won't say adult social care. And so you've got that combination of something that isn't a top of mind priority for the public, but which is going to cause, is going to cost money. And as a result, politicians tend to steer clear of it. When they don't steer clear of it, frankly, it's not ended well. So you've seen things like the death tax and the dementia tax. All of that has created a situation where it's hard to get this on the political agenda, but it has to be on the political agenda because it's such a fundamental and crucial issue.
And in terms of some of the ideas, I mean, as you say, that the death tax and the dementia tax, the reality is that at some point it is going to involve some kind of tax or some kind of levy. In your view, what's the best way to do that, administer that?
I think there are lots of different ways that you could fund it. The first thing, though, to decide is what it is that you want to fund, because until you've decided who is going to benefit the most and what sort of services they're going to receive, how much people are going to have to contribute at the time, it's very hard to say now, well, exactly how should we fund it, because different people will benefit differently from different systems. So you need to have the conversation about how you fund it a little bit later, after you've you've started to work out what it is that you're trying to create in the first place.
And look, it feels like there's been such a delay on this, and Louise Casey is going to turn her attention to it, and she is formidable and she's effective. She is a very, very good Whitehall operator. But how long do you think all of this is going to take, Simon? And by the time she has this national conversation and maybe comes up with a shape of what you've described, will we not be in the run-up to the next general election? And what we learnt from Theresa May in the 2017 general election is it's not great to float a big revolutionary idea on care in the run-up to an election, or indeed in the middle of an election.
Yeah, and I think that's always been a fundamental problem with the timescale that they set out. That Casey will be coming up with recommendations, as you say, in the run-up to a general election. It's an independent commission, so I guess it has the opportunity to float that out there, get it discussed, during an election campaign, without any of the parties necessarily having to be absolutely committed to what they're going to do. Because I think it will be very difficult to actually get commitments to it this side of the general election. Let's hope so, but I wouldn't be optimistic about that.
One of our few messages that have come in, Simon, Tom has said a fair system would be a system where we don't dump the bill on future generations. And Paul says a swathe of well-run councils will go bankrupt in the next 2 to 3 years due to adult social care costs, which are similar to NHS rates of inflation, while they're capped at 4.99%. Have you got any response to those comments, Simon?
Well, it's certainly a huge issue for local authorities, and you're right. I mean, local authorities actually over the last 10 years or so have actually spent more money on social care. They've been increasing expenditure in order to try and keep pace with demand, often not successfully. So they've been trying quite hard, but what they're doing as a result is they're eating into their reserves, and they're also having to cut other services, things like refuse services and road services. So in order to maintain a decent social care system, or one that doesn't fall over, local authorities are really, really stretched financially, and ultimately that is not sustainable. So another reason, frankly, why we will have to make a decision about this at some stage, and frankly sooner rather than later.
And what are other countries that are comparable to Britain where you think they've got it right, or how do other countries do it?
Well, there's probably two systems used sort of worldwide. They have some similarities and they have some differences. So you'll find in the Nordic countries, for example, and Denmark is the most obvious example, they have something that looks pretty much like our NHS. So it's a free at point of use service with high standards, and it's funded out of taxation, and people are required to pay very little towards the cost of it. That would be a very, very expensive system to introduce here, but it's a system that they like in Denmark.
And how's that funded? Just through general taxation, or?
Yeah, Denmark is funded through general taxation. The alternative is what's called a sort of social insurance type model. And there, again, you've got the same basic principle, which is everybody is entitled to some degree of support if they've got a relatively high level of need. But first of all, they contribute towards the costs as they go. So, you may end up paying, 20, 30, 40% of the cost of your home care, for example. So you contribute towards the cost as you go in co-payments. And that will, and they're often funded out of a direct tax out of your payslip. And so you know that money is going to fund social care. It's ring fenced for social care. So there's a couple of systems there which, work pretty well. They have different levels of cost, but they prove that you can do this. It's just that you need to have the political will to do it.
Political will, that's the thing. Simon, a really interesting conversation. Thank you for being so generous with your time. That's Simon Bottery, Senior Fellow of Social Care at the King's Fund. Well, look, there are lots of rumours floating around that maybe Vladimir Putin is employing a body double after a seemingly throwaway comment made during a meeting to Moscow. In a video published by the Kremlin, a deputy prime minister appears to address the Russian president as Pal-like.
Как у нас посевная идет?
Павел спасибо большое. Да, я презентацию подготовил. Там в целом...
And it's been suggested that that was the presumed identity of one of Putin's alleged body doubles. Well, let's now speak with Times foreign correspondent and seasoned Moscow watcher Mark Bennett. Mark, welcome. What do you think's going on here? Do you think there's any truth in it?
I think it's important to point out that a lot of the suggestions that he accidentally referred to Putin's body double were kind of slightly tongue-in-cheek, kind of partly in jest. But there have been rumors, it's true, for years that Putin has used the body double or lookalikes to ensure his own personal security. But basically, we don't know. Ukrainian military intelligence has said that there are 3 body doubles. Putin uses them on different occasions. Putin himself has been asked about it in 2020. He said that he was offered the chance to use body doubles when he became president in the early 2000s to protect him against attacks by Chechen terrorists. But he rejected the idea. But of course, it's not going to stop the speculation.
And have any other Russian presidents done anything like this, used body doubles?
Stalin is believed to have used body doubles. Yeah, there was even one of his body doubles wrote a book during Putin's presidency about how he was Stalin's double.
And in terms of the sort of security around Putin, does he turn up at many events, or has he scaled back? Because I presume he has to have huge amounts of security, but does it feel like he is at heightened risk at the moment?
Well, obviously there's always been large amounts of security around Putin, as he's the leader of Russia, the world's biggest nuclear superpower. I don't know. There was a European intelligence report recently that said he was staying mainly in his bunker in southern Russia, but that doesn't really seem to be true since, for example, yesterday he was in Kazakhstan. He flew to Kazakhstan. He had massive security. He was accompanied by a vehicle with a machine gun on the top and anti-drone technology. But he was on Red Square on May the 9th. Again, admittedly, not for very long. But I don't think we can say that he's hiding in a bunker. I don't think there's really any truth to that.
Okay. Right? All right. Well, thanks very much for your time. That's Mark Bennett. Right, we've got plenty more to come here on the show. Stay tuned. You're listening to Aisha Hazarika on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio. It starts with listening.
Good afternoon. It's just gone 2:00. You're listening to Aisha Hazarika. This is Times Radio. Coming up next, my big interview at 2:00 is with the former top lawyer at the FBI, Andrew Weissman. He's going to tell us why politicians who tell lies should feel the full force of the law. And I'll meet the man who's been hunting Britain's fugitives, as new statistics revealed that nearly 60,000 suspected criminals skipped court appearances in England and Wales. We've got lots to discuss, but first let's catch up with Ellie J for all the latest news.
Thanks, Aisha. Good afternoon. The Prime Minister's called a drone attack on Romania a serious violation of NATO airspace. Ukraine's calling for decisive action against Russia after 2 people were injured when 2 drones from Moscow hit a block of flats in Romania in the eastern region of Galatz near the Ukrainian border. NATO has vowed to bolster its defences and called the actions reckless. Speaking on Times Radio, Michael Evans, former defence editor of The Times, questioned whether the attack was deliberate.
Was this deliberate? I really don't think that one can rule out that this was a deliberate act by Russia. I have no doubt when the Kremlin eventually makes a statement, they will say either that it was a Ukrainian drone or that it wasn't anything intentional. But, we know that the Kremlin has carried out a large number of violent incidents against NATO members.
2 brothers accused of assaulting police at Manchester Airport will not face a third retrial. Mohammed Fahir Ahmaz and Mohammed Ahmad from Rochdale both denied attacking a male officer in July 2024. Jurors had been unable to reach verdicts in 2 previous trials. The Home Office is expected to begin using AI facial recognition tests to estimate the age of asylum seekers claiming to be children. The IT company behind it says the technology could also be used to determine the age of people who lack verifiable identity documents, such as those arriving in the UK on small boats. Investigations are underway in the US to work out what caused a Blue Origin rocket to explode into a fireball during a test launch. Jeff Bezos, who owns the company, called it a rough day. Houses near the site in Cape Canaveral in Florida began to shake when it happened, but no one was hurt. Aerospace engineer Sinead O'Sullivan says this kind of thing might start happening more often.
As we start to test and try to build larger and larger capabilities, not only for getting to the moon via the new Artemis program, but eventually try to get to Mars, we're going to start to see explosions on Earth that are just at the scale that we have not seen in rocket development before.
A 16-year-old boy's become the 12th person to drown during the recent hot weather. Police were called to Bracklin Falls near Callander in Stirlingshire last night. Experts have been reminding swimmers of the risks of cold water shock and of going into unsupervised waters. Thousands of people in Kent have faced disruptions to their water supplies since Wednesday evening. South East Water said its reservoirs have reached a critical level and are asking the public to only use tap water for essential purposes like bathing and drinking. Millie Bowles is a reporter for Kent Online. She told Times Radio local residents are worried for the future.
Business owners especially, they're really, really frustrated with this. They say that they've not done any forward planning, and they've not invested enough in their infrastructure. Housing's also an issue that's come up a lot from people. There's a lot more houses planned in the area over the coming years and sort of decades. And there's, the question of whether the water system can cope.
And for a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on any podcast platform.
Across the UK, on DAB Digital Radio, on the free Times Radio app, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Welcome back to the second hour of the show. We've got lots of great topics to discuss. And thanks very much for all of your brilliant comments coming in. Terry has messaged in saying, "Hello, Aisha, I always look forward to your show." Thank you, Terry. He has an interesting idea. He says, "I wonder if we could solve scrapping the triple lock issue by offering to use any savings for sorting out adult social care. It might take a lot of the heat out of the pensioners' mutiny." I mean, that is a very good suggestion, Terry. It just does feel like this is an issue that governments just can't afford not to think about, because this is an issue that affects so many families. And I think the point that my previous guest made is a pertinent one. I suppose it's a bit like the pensions issues we were talking about last week. A lot of people, and I include myself, haven't really been that interested in pensions until you get a bit older and you're like, oh, actually, this is something that now really affects me. And I think that's so true of adult social care, and it's something that affects us all. It feels like it's unfair on everybody, and the system is so broken. So I think, and lots of people are messaging in saying that it puts incredible pressure on families in terms of how to sort of navigate the system. And the other issue as well, a couple of people have messaged through, is how care homes operate, the expense of care homes. And we've had a discussion before about retirement buildings as well, but also private equity in care homes as well, who's running care homes, how the kind of profiteering of care homes works. All of that is very interesting as well. We'll come back to this issue because lots of comments have come in. Right, well, I'm really interested in the book that my next guest has written, and I think you will be too, because you all love politics as I do, and we spend a lot of time on this show debating what is political truth, what are political lies, where's the spin, do all politicians tell lies, and is there a way to stop them doing it? And of course, some are more brazen about it than others.
Photographs of the inaugural proceedings were intentionally framed in a way to minimize the enormous support that had gathered on the National Mall. This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
Now, a former US federal prosecutor and former FBI general counsel, top lawyer at the FBI, is calling for politicians who lie to be punished in the US in the same way that it is in other walks of life. For example, a CEO who lies to boost the market value of a company can get fined and even put in jail. But there's no legal recourse for politicians who lie, despite the damage that it can do to trust in democracy and arguably to the lives of citizens. Andrew Weissman was a senior figure in the former FBI Director Robert Mueller's investigation of Russian interference in the presidential election of 2016 and Trump's links to Moscow. He's the author of a new book called Liar's Kingdom, How to Stop Trump's Deceit and Save Democracy. And it's currently number 1 in the Amazon non-fiction chart in the US. And it's a lot of buzz around this book at the moment. I'm delighted that Andrew joins us live in the studio at Times Radio. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
So tell us about this book and why you felt compelled to write it now.
Well, as you mentioned, I was a federal prosecutor in the United States for over 20 years, and it was striking to me the anomaly that it is a crime in the United States, for instance, to lie to Congress, lying to Congress. But if Congress lies to us, that's not a crime. So if a member of Congress tells an absolute lie, a factual lie, not an opinion, not a mistake, but an actual lie, that is not regulated criminally or civilly. Similarly, if you defame somebody, like here in the UK or in the United States, there are consequences. You can be civilly liable. Famously, Rudy Giuliani was found liable for doing that with 2 Georgia election workers. Or to take something quite current in the United States, E. Jean Carroll won 2 separate cases against our current president for defamation and for sexual assault. And so we regulate that. But when it comes to, let's just take one of the, what I think is a lie that you just played, which is Donald Trump saying that there was material fraud in the 2020 election. That is not regulated in any way. And what my book is about is why we don't do that. And I look at other countries, see what they do. I look at other states in the United States to see what they do. And trying to think about a way forward to thwart or at least dampen the real problem in the United States of political lies.
And what do you have in mind? Do you have a particular piece of statute? What are you thinking?
Yeah, a great question. So what I tried to do was think about things that could be done by Congress, by statute, because although we do have a system for amending our Constitution, that is a very cumbersome process. And I was trying to think of things that would be more practical and more realistic. Now, I am not so naive to think that this current Congress would enact a law like this, but I really want people to start thinking about once Trump is no longer president and we...
although we don't know when that might be.
We don't, but our Constitution is very clear. And unless something extraordinary happens, which would be completely outside of the Constitution, there is no such thing as a third term under our Constitution. But we will still have the problem of political lies. That's something that is not also unique to one political party. It is also not unique to the United States. I've seen, obviously not as closely as you, but I've seen that problem here in Europe as well.
Oh, yeah, don't fear not. It's happening here too.
So I would really wanted people to think about on the 250th anniversary of our Constitution, and I know that's a drop in the bucket here in England, but it is an important moment, an inflection point for our country to think about what kind of structures can we create to harden the target, to make it harder for authoritarians to replicate the kind of political lies that I've been observing.
And I suppose the question that I'm really interested in, because I think your intentions here are noble and significant and important given where we are. I suppose lots of my listeners sitting at home might say, well, hang on a minute. politics is the art of communication, and part of the art of communication for political terms is bending the truth, manipulating the truth, spinning a line. Propaganda is a huge part of the art of politics. Where do you draw the line between what is a hard lie and what is sort of that grey area?
So one thing I should point out is, in the UK, you do have a law, I write about it. And maybe it's somewhat of an anomaly that I'm an American talking about that, but I wanted the American audience for this book, as well as sort of the European audience, to understand the different structures in different countries. But you do have a law where if there is a material lie about a political adversary during a campaign, that you can be disqualified and no longer in office. And the question that you're raising is one that, as both a prosecutor and a defense lawyer, is common, which is it is not a crime to say something that's a mistake. It is not a crime to say something that is just a difference of opinion. And to prove that somebody is saying something that is knowingly and intentionally false, you need to be able to show that somebody is saying something that is not just wrong, but they know it is wrong. So
they're deliberately misleading.
Exactly. So an example of that in my book is the idea that there was material fraud in the 2020 election. That is something that was litigated in over 60 court cases and found that there was no evidence of that. To this day, we're still waiting, in spite of claims of material fraud, we're still waiting to see any proof of that. And so, to be clear, in my sort of solution going forward, it would be incumbent on the prosecution, as in any criminal matter, to be able to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt.
So you have quite a high threshold.
Exactly, to deal with the issue, precisely the issue you're raising, which is that you don't want to see people who are engaged in legitimate debate, legitimate opinion being prosecuted.
I suppose what is difficult about this sort of zone that we're in is that so much sails really close to the line of just being an outright lie, and social media really helps turbocharge that, right? Particularly because we now get a lot of our news in these hyper amplified echo chambers, which give us, as that the Kellyanne Conway, there are alternative facts. That famous interview that she did about the thing. So it does feel that that's the thing which is difficult, isn't it? We are in this slightly through the looking glass thing where your lie is just my opinion.
Yeah. So I think the Kellyanne Conway example is a good one, because there actually are no alternative facts. The alternative to facts is misinformation. And so I think that's a good example of something that could be prosecuted, where you're just saying something that is intentionally false. One example that I think would resonate with you is I engage in journalism, and I'm a legal analyst on MS Now in the United States. You engage in journalism. One of the things that reputable journalistic organizations have is standards departments, like compliance departments, to make sure that when you're speaking, that it is something that is both accurate, truthful, supported, accurately sourced. And one of the reasons to do that is not just because you want to have good information going out to listeners, but also it is protective so that you don't get sued for defamation. And so we're used to dealing with the difference between opinion and something that would be not just inaccurate, but intentionally inaccurate. And so that's something that people live with in journalism. It's something that people, I think, should have to live with. If you have taken an oath of office to represent the public, you should feel an obligation to do what good journalists do, which is to make sure that what you are disseminating as factual information, not opinion, but as factual information, is accurate and honest.
I mean, what's interesting about that, of course, is that there's quite a pushback. And of course, I think you really saw Donald Trump kind of write the playbook on this, which is quite a lot of pushback against the mainstream media, saying we're not having you fact check us. We're not having you challenge us on the veracity or the accuracy of what we're saying. We're going to circumvent the traditional media and go to our own people now, the podcasters who support us, the news outlets that support us. And that splintering of the media landscape has also made what you're describing more challenging, right?
100%, because the old rule used to be, well, one answer to the problem of false political speech used to be, well, the answer to false speech is just to have more truthful speech, and that people would learn the truth, and that would sort of win the day. And what you're describing is the new world we're in with these media bubbles, and it no longer can be the case that you just say, well, the answer to this false speech is true speech. And I should say in the United States, that isn't the answer, because we criminalize false speech by corporate executives. We criminalize false speech to Congress, to the FBI, to banks. There are all sorts of ways that we don't say, well, the solution is just more truthful speech. And the same thing with defamation law, whether it's here in the UK or in the United States. We actually have civil liability for people who say something that is defamatory. So there are all sorts of ways that speech can be regulated. And my book is about why do we not do that with respect to truly false factual speech by politicians.
Lots of really interesting, our listeners are finding this very fascinating conversation. One of our listeners, Lisa, says, after listening to Andrew take part on a panel on France 24, I've just ordered his book, and I'd like to ask him whether he has any concerns that Trump will come after him. And let's have a listen to a clip, because you have actually been specifically targeted by Donald Trump for your work, particularly with the former director of the FBI, Robert Mueller. Let's have a listen.
His interviewer was, I think that was Weissman, and I hope they're going to look into Weissman too. Weissman's a bad guy. There was tremendous criminal activity having to do. If we don't have fair elections in this country, we're not going to have a country.
Do you worry about that? Do you worry that you will feel the full force of the law? I mean, James Comey has, others have. Do you worry about retribution from the White House?
Well, there have been numerous examples of that. And so, there are very few advantages of aging. One of them, though, is that you really become very comfortable with who you are and getting on with your life. So, whatever's going to happen will happen. What is happening in the United States, though, with retributive indictments, some that have been brought, some which grand juries have rejected, is a whole other phenomenon that has to be dealt with. I should say.
Does it feel McCarthy-esque?
Yes. So I start my book talking about a conversation with my parents who lived through the McCarthy period. And I'm not going to give a spoiler alert, but the conversation is about which period was worse, which felt more dangerous, the Joseph McCarthy period in the 50s, which was the famous Red Scare, or what we're living through now. This is one where the United States has to figure a way back to the rule of law. And as flawed as our system that was something that was an aspiration of our country that we tried to live up to. And what I'm trying to write about and have people think about is what kind of structures can we put in place to get to where we really need to be at this sort of 250th anniversary of our country.
And final question to you, Andrew, what do you think you would say the lessons for us over here should be looking at what's happened in America? Because it's often said that we often follow a lot of the political and social and cultural trends of America.
Well, one of the things that I'm hopeful is that you can see the excesses and the downsides of what I think is very much a lawless society, where the checks and balances that were built into our systems are not holding. a media environment where it's becoming harder and harder to have truthful information check the political leaders. And the importance of what in the United States we call the fourth estate of journalism to be able to get truthful information out to the public. So I'm hoping that what people see in the United States is a lesson of where you essentially don't want to be.
Just before I let you go, sorry, it's a final question, but lots of messages coming in. I just want to put a challenge question to you, if that's okay, from one of our listeners.
Love it.
Simone. Our listeners are very independent-minded. They love challenging.
Great.
They love
Good.
cheering, but challenging as well. And Simone says, subjecting politicians' words, however misleading they may be, to technocratic control is even more sinister and dangerous than restricting ordinary free speech. An educated electorate and a free press, allowing people to judge for themselves, are the only way forward. To hear a former prosecutor advocating for prosecutors to have a role in determining what constitutes false political discourse makes me shiver. What would you say to Simon?
So, I'm enough of a lawyer that I do think about and I write about what the downsides are and the risks. So I think that this listener is correct to be pointing that out. In the variety of solutions that I am suggesting could happen, I am not saying that prosecutors have the final say at all. We have a jury system in the United States, and citizens would be making that decision. So I hate to say make a plug for this, but I do have a longer explanation, but I think that is a wonderful comment. And it's great that people think about what are potential downsides of new structures, but I would encourage people to think about and not say, well, there shouldn't be any changes, because at least in the United States, our system is very, very much broken, and we have to really think ourselves into a place to rectify where we are.
Well, Simon, I hope you felt that you got a decent answer to your question, and of course you can read for yourself more in terms of Andrew's brilliant book, which is called Liar's Kingdom: How to Stop Trump's Deceit and Save Democracy, which there's a lot of buzz about this book at the moment, and it's the #1 Amazon non-fiction book at the moment. Andrew, what a pleasure to speak to you. I've really enjoyed that conversation. Lots to think about, lots of brain food for us to process there. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for your time. Right, coming up next, we're going to stick with our theme on Donald Trump. We know that he likes to put his name and face on things, so we're going to hear about plans to put him on a special $250 banknote. It's just coming up to 2:25. You're listening to Aisha Hazarika on Times Radio.
Jeff Norcott on Times Radio.
I'm Jeff Norcott, and on this week's Friday Night with Norcott, comedian Ollie Horn joins me for 5 Stories with a Funny Friend, where we'll no doubt be talking about expensive fountain pens and mobile homes, and possibly something about the weather. I'll also be joined by the director of a new documentary called US Against the World, 4 years with the men's soccer team. I think it's called football, mate. I'll also be speaking to an absolute clown. No, it's not a candidate from the upcoming by-election, it's an actual clown. Plus the Westminster Rap, Anatomy of the Song, and the show will be topped off by the Friday Night Pub Quiz.
Jeff Norcott, tonight from 7 on Times Radio.
I believe those who are curious see the world differently. At Viking, we have always been curious and quite a bit different. For over 25 years, we have been connecting the thinking person with the world. First on the great rivers, then on all 5 oceans, now on all 7 continents. We are one Viking, exploring the world in comfort.
Get your supporters back! Get your supporters back!
Are you feeling World Cup for it? Get in the mood with your free supporters pack from The Sun, including a brilliant England bucket hat and flag. Pick up The Sun this Saturday to get yours. The Sun, we're World Cup for it. T's and C's apply.
Listen live or catch up on shows you might have missed using the Times Radio app for iOS or Android.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio. with Aisha Hazarika.
Well, let's stick with our theme concerning Donald Trump, and his administration is preparing to print a new $250 bill that could feature a portrait of him if lawmakers allow the move. Now, federal law bars printing US money with the image of any living person, but Trump allies in Congress have introduced legislation that would make an exception for him. Now, let's now speak with Greg Swenson, who is chair of Republicans Overseas, and Greg joins us now from Washington, D.C. Greg, hello, welcome.
Aisha, good to see you again.
It is. I feel I've not spoken to you for a while. Is life good?
Yeah, everything's great, except I'm capped at 90 days in your great country. So the new tax code has affected my residency. And if anyone from the HMRC is listening, I am definitely not a resident of the United Kingdom.
Okay, just as I hope you've got that. That's on the record now. So look, what do you make about this? Donald Trump's face on a new bill. Are you up for that?
Yeah, I'm up for it, Aisha. And I think the key word that you mentioned was exception. And I don't necessarily advocate, making a habit of this, but I think an exception for the 250th birthday of the country. And the fact that it's on a $250 bill, which I don't think will end up being a currency that's used frequently. I think it's more of a novelty. So for that reason, I think it's okay.
And you don't think it sort of slightly veers into looking a bit narcissistic? And if this is not a thing that has been done, it looks a bit weird to do it just because it's Donald Trump?
Well, totally. I mean, but he's also put his name on everything he could possibly put it on, So I think to suggest that the president has got a robust ego is probably an understatement. So I think, this doesn't shock me, although I don't think it will happen, by the way, because it has to be approved by the Congress. And my guess is it won't get the votes.
And look, in terms of the conversation we were having before, I don't know if you caught much of it, but it's Andrew Weissman, who, former FBI bigwig. I mean, he is saying that misinformation in America and that politicians have been lying too much, including Donald Trump. He thinks that there should be a statute introduced where if politicians lie, then, they should face the full force of the law. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a little much. I mean, politicians are some of them are really good liars, some of them not so good. But the president, for all the criticism he gets about lying, which I think is a myth in many ways. I mean, please tell me some lies that he's done. He exaggerates and he uses hyperbole for sure, but he is the most transparent, candid president we've ever had. Sometimes it gets him in trouble because he's remarkably candid. He just sort of says what's on his mind without a filter, and that's refreshing in many respects. And again, sometimes when you're that refreshing, you're bound to get into trouble once in a while. But I don't, I'd love to hear the journalist, examples of Trump lying. It's funny, but again, I'm not defending the politicians that lie because they just do it habitually, and that's not new. I think if there was some sort of rule against it, I'm not sure there'd be any politicians left.
But do you not remember when the inauguration happened? And I mean, that just was not true about the numbers. I don't really care either way.
Yeah.
But that clearly, we had Sean Spicer going, this is like a huge number of people. It's this number of people. It just wasn't that number of people, Greg.
Yeah, I'm sure we can find some examples. That one's sort of, to me, trivial. I'm with you.
I'm not saying trivial, but it is like you said. There's no. I mean, that just was not true, right? You and I, we've done lots of work together. We just know that wasn't true.
I think Sean Spicer, would probably like to take that one back. But I remember it was like schoolyard argument or bullying. It was just my crowd was bigger than your crowd. It was kind of silly. And again, I know he definitely exaggerates. He uses the term, greatest and biggest, and we've never seen a crowd that big before. There is some hyperbole there, but I'd love to hear what's an actual lie? Did he say that I never talked to my son about his international business dealings? And then there's a picture at Cafe Milano with a couple of guys from Kazakhstan and Russia. And so, those are kind of lies that are meaningful. But
so there's meaningful lies and there's other lies.
Yeah. I feel like I'm getting in trouble with nuns at school. it's not. I'm not condoning it, but I think he's actually much more candid and open. And if he exaggerates, okay, guilty. He's the chief exaggerator.
Okay. Well, look, Greg, always good to catch up with you, and hopefully when you're over next time we can catch up in person.
That'll be great.
Thanks for joining us. That's Greg Swenson. So many messages coming in about the Trump bill. Kieran says Donald Trump's face on a $250 bill makes the US currency look like monopoly money. Steve says yet another vanity project by Trump. He lies. He never beat Biden. He just sent his thugs up to Capitol Hill. That's Steve from Surrey. Jan says this guy's making my blood boil. Trump lies frequently. We all know it. I think we just heard from Greg. He's just the exaggerator in chief. Richard says, let's hope this new $250 bill has got a weather vane on the reverse side. Charlie says, do you think this new bill is in preparation for the runaway inflation that the orange one is causing to avoid the need for wheelbarrows of cash, as has happened in other countries before? Oh, Charlie, that's quite an ominous prediction. Stuart says, as all notes have nicknames, will the 251 be known as Trump? Hilarious for any small children or childish adults like me. We love childish adults, Stuart. And Lisa says, the best that can be said about this latest vanity project is that it will serve as a reminder of how not to do leadership. And Jan says, will no one stand up to Trump's ridiculous whims and fancies? I despair. Right, we got plenty more to come. We're going to be covering that story about the attack that took place in Manchester Airport a couple of years ago. That was an altercation between Manchester police and two local people. We're going to be catching up on that. We're also going to be looking at this very interesting story about the number of people, criminals, who are skipping court. 60,000 criminals skip court in England and Wales last year. It's a really interesting story. It's something I'm very interested in. But right, we've got plenty to get through, but it's just gone 2:33. Let's catch up with Ellie J for all the latest news.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, Aisha. Good afternoon. The Prime Minister's condemned Russia after a drone it fired at Ukraine instead landed on a housing estate in Romania, injuring 2 people. Sir Keir Starmer's accused Moscow of repeatedly showing disregard for civilian life. It happened as Russia carried out further attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure. Former US Ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker, spoke to this programme.
There would not be drones flying around and missiles flying around if Russia stopped the war. So we need to keep up the pressure for Russia to end it, not just say, don't do this anymore, we'll defend our territory.
2 brothers accused of assaulting a police officer at Manchester Airport won't face a third retrial. 2 juries have been unable to reach a verdict. One of the men, 21-year-old Mohammed Fahir Ahmad, will be sentenced next month for assaulting 2 other officers during the same incident in July 2024. People in parts of Kent are being warned that disruption to their water supply could continue over the weekend. Kent County Council says it will step up public scrutiny following a series of water outages. South East Water said its reservoirs have reached a critical level. And Gen 2 penguins kept at the Sea Life London Aquarium are to be rehomed from their basement enclosure. The owner, Merlin Entertainments, says they'll move to a larger, naturally lit facility. And for a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on the Times Radio app.
This is Times Radio.
Those who are curious feel an urge to travel, to explore the world. At Viking, we create voyages for the thinking person because travel enriches the mind and connects cultures in meaningful ways. With small, modern, all-veranda ocean ships that were designed to bring you closer to the destination, discover the world's iconic cities and quaint villages, exploring the world in comfort. Learn more at Viking.com.
Hey there, it's your big McDonald's hunger calling. And it's not just any kind of hunger. It's the kind that calls for big arch. Start with juicy beef, cheddar cheese and big arch sauce. Oh, and don't forget those crispy onions. Hungry? You are now. Served from 11 a.m. Subject to availability. Price and participation may vary.
Wake up to Kate McCann and Stig Abel. Go home with John Pienaar. Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker, this is Times Radio.
Now, it was a video that shocked the country back in July 2024, a violent altercation in the car park of Manchester Airport that saw a police officer from Greater Manchester Police appear to stamp on a man's head, sparking furious street protests and a massive debate about public police brutality. Well, today the CPS has confirmed that it will not pursue a third trial against the two brothers, Mohammed Fair Amaz and Mohammed Ahmad, after two separate juries failed to reach verdicts over allegations that they assaulted a male police officer. Well, let's now catch up with the Times Northern correspondent, Constance Kampfner. Constance, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Just remind us about what happened with this case and then bring us up to speed on what's happened today.
Absolutely. So a video dropped onto social media that very quickly went viral. And as you said in the introduction, it appeared to show a man on the floor and a male officer over him, having already deployed his taser, stamping on his head. It provoked widespread fury and outrage. Greater Manchester's police initial response was deemed to be too weak and sort of be giving of the officers involved. And then a few days later, some footage was leaked to the media, which showed the moments leading up to that incident. And it showed the two brothers sort of throwing a number of punches. And the CPS, when they brought this to trial, said that they had displayed a high level of violence towards two female officers, a male officer and a member of the public.
And it was one of those things where it was a kind of reminder for everybody to not jump to a conclusion, to wait for everything to come out, not just look at what happened on social media. So tell us what happened today and what's kind of been the legal journey since then.
So the younger brother, Amaz, he was previously convicted of assaulting the two female officers, one of whom had a broken nose, and that member of the public, which is what led to the officers being called in the first place. And he'll be sentenced later in June. However, there was this other charge to do with PC Zachary Marsden. He was the one initially filmed, stamping on Amaz's head. And that charge, the jury in the first trial couldn't come to a conclusion about whether the two brothers had assaulted him. That was put up for a retrial, and the same result. The jury could not come to a decision. It's highly unusual for the CPS to go after a third trial, and indeed in this case, they have decided not to.
And do we understand why the jury couldn't come to a verdict? Do we have any insight into that?
Well, the brothers' defence was that they were acting, out of self-defence, that there was kind of violence, if you like, going both ways. It's important to note that the officer involved, PC Zachary Marsden, was initially suspended from Greater Manchester Police while it was decided whether charges would be brought against him. They were not. He's since been reinstated. However, there is an ongoing investigation into him by the IOPC and into other officers involved in the case.
So that's the Independent Office for Police Conduct. And look, just taking a step back, Constance, what do you think this does for sort of confidence in the police and the jury system?
Well, it was very much framed by the brothers' solicitor as a sort of, they would say, kind of racially charged provocation. They say that the brothers have faced, all sorts of threats online, on social media, since this case has come to court. And, you've had from the other side, people like Nigel Farage saying that this case actually exemplifies two-tier justice going the other way. Now, those comments were actually referred to the Attorney General because they were made during that first trial. So they were, the judge decided a potential contempt of court. However, the Attorney General decided not to pursue it. And so it's sort of become this kind of culture war flashpoint, really.
Well, look, Constance, that was a very useful update. Thanks very much for your time. That's Constance Kampfner, who is the Times Northern correspondent. Now, there's a really interesting story I wanted to dig into, and this is new data revealing that the birth rate in England and Wales has plummeted to an all-time historic low, and the average number of children per woman has fallen to 1.44. Now, to keep a population stable without relying heavily on migration, that number needs to be higher. That needs to be at least 2.1. So you've got 1.44 where it needs to be is 2.1. Now, some might look at this shrinking population as a win for the environment. Others have a different view. Economists and demographers are warning that this could be a sort of social tipping point. Well, joining me now to help make sense of the data is Berkay Ozcan from the London School of Economics. Berkay, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So just explain, what does 1.44 children mean?
So that is the total fertility rate indicator. This is a kind of a concept of a cohort that is applied to something that is changing over time. So it's not very intuitively understood. It is not that every woman should have 1.4 kids. What it means basically, if the current fertility rates for each age had continued through the life courses of everyone who's living, we would have on average among the fertile window women 1.44 kids. And that's the technical explanation of it. It's a shortcut for us to see.
A kind of, it used to be, isn't it, the 2.4, you know, that was the kind of the, I feel like my mum is probably listening to this going, Aisha, you've not done your bit, having produced not a single child that we know about. But look, what is the reason for this falling birth rate?
So the birth rates have been falling in the UK since 2010. 2024 was kind of an exception. And that was a slightly uptick that gave demographers and economists who think that having more kids is a good thing a bit of hope. But it hasn't been the case. So we have been seeing the decline already since the Great Recession up until now steadily. And I should also say that UK is not in isolation. So almost in all advanced economies, we're converging around the same rates, more or less, in Europe too. And very few areas in the world that actually have remained above the population replacement rate, 2.1, which you spelled out, which is sub-Saharan African countries and Central Asian countries. And the rest of the world is getting the same direction as we are getting to.
This is happening in America and Europe.
Exactly. It's almost every advanced economy, plus many of the middle-income countries.
And Berkay, when you said there was a slight tick upwards, why do you think that was? Was that COVID or was that what happened?
Well, no, it's post-COVID. 2024 numbers were slightly uptick. These measures at 1.4, 2.1 are very sensitive to short-run changes in what's happening. It might be small fluctuations in the migration groups, or it might be small changes in the economic incentives. What we really look for is TFR rate to be persistently for a number of years, so that they can have some consequences in the overall population structure that we care most.
And what are the sort of reasons behind it? Is it economic? Is it cost of living?
Yeah.
Is it cultural? And, women such as, people like women like myself sort of making an active choice not to have children. What's going on?
So this is the million-dollar question. Almost all demographers around the world trying to get an answer to this question. I mean, there are various theories going on. I mean, in the UK context, I can talk about, the headline news of the Office of National Statistics report is the biggest collapse in fertility rate is in the 20-something, the younger age group. There are various theories about why this is happening. Part of it is mechanically postponement. People are not having kids, but they are postponing to mid-30s to have the kids. That means that some of those postponement cannot be recovered because they hit the age 40. The window of having more than 2 kids is really shrink between mid-30s to 40s. And that might be happening. I mean, that's clearly happening with the ONS data sets. But why it's postponement happening is there are 2 or 3 explanations. One of them is young people today are not really settling in the family formation as early as the former generations used to have. Up until mid-30s, the housing is not really sorted out easily. In the UK, it's a big factor. Also, labor market instability and insecurity is another factor. People are not really on long-term tenured, secure jobs. And the family formation is postponed to 30s that are making the window of having kids really, really short. That leads to two things, right? So one of them is the decision to become a parent is a different decision to have more than 2 kids, right? So it's doing both ends. On one hand, family formation delay results in having more people spending much of their lives as singles. And then there's other group of families where they're having fewer kids than they would have once they have formed a partnership and had their first child.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because all of that, I completely agree with you, and it cuts across it. So that there's different, touch points across all of that in terms of how people form their romantic engagements, mental health issues, social media, people not going out as much as they do, cost of living, childcare, all of these things. It's such an intricate sort of, you have to join up the dots between lots of these things, and which I think is absolutely fascinating. And, times have changed. Lots of, women and indeed, men sort of think, well, actually, I do want to say postpone it. Some people make an active choice that they don't. The other thing, which of course is a bit of a talking point about these figures when you're looking at the demographics, is looking across racial lines as well. And so it's a bit of the elephant in the room. Let's go there. Tell us about, I hate to be so crude about it, but in terms of, white birth rate and ethnic minority birth rate.
So the discussion around the ONS is not about ethnic racial lines, but it's about the migrant versus native status lines. Right. And the statistics that we have collected and they reported are whether the kids are being born to migrant children versus being born to children whose both parents have been UK born. So that those definitions are very fluid, like along the ethnicity lines too, because you can have white migrants versus non-white migrants. And we want to know where the children are more likely to be born. The ONS release results show us that about nearly 40% of the kids that are born to families where there's at least one parent who was born outside the UK.
Wow,
40% of the kids who were born in last year were born to families where there were at least one parent whose birthplace is somewhere else in the UK. So there's this discussion that becomes immediately politicized, whether do we need migrants for keeping up the population structure, if you want to keep up the population structure. You are saying that for environmental reasons, or for many reasons, is this the right world that we want to bring children in? It's obviously a preference issue. But there's another thing that there's various reports out there, they show that the gap between desired number of kids, desired fertility, and actual fertility is growing in much of the places within the UK as well as in Europe. So if people are not really fulfilling their desired fertility levels, then it becomes an issue where the policy should be intervening to help people to get to the number of kids that they actually desire to have, or whether we should be thinking about the barriers, really structural barriers more deeply.
It's so interesting because previously we had a conversation as well about adult social care and
right.
There is a point as well. The other thing you have to look at is how many people you have paying in tax to support some of those spending you want to do later down, the life expectancy, particularly health costs, pension costs, adult social care costs. Before I let you go, just briefly, quite a few people have messaged in saying they've seen lots of reports that say this is a bad thing, but quite a few people are saying, actually, isn't it good from an environmental point of view to have fewer people?
Yes, this question, I get it a lot. And, I'm not an environmental scientist, but my short answer as a demographer in this position is, for saving environment, if we all stop having kids today, and the existing number of people could actually bring down the environmental collapse sufficiently by themselves, right? The babies in their first 10 years don't really contribute to the environmental collapse as much as adults who are over-consuming. So I think that is the answer that I can give as a demographer and as someone who really thinks and imagines a world where we need both the workforce, but also from the economic point of view, in critical occupations, but also a world where there's more children is a world where I imagine empathy is more prevalent than a world with less children. So I do think that
You
there's...
say that, some of them are absolutely terrible. Only kidding. Only kidding. Listen, Berkay, what fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for taking us through the figures. I feel like we've all learnt a lot. Such an interesting topic. Could do a whole kind of hour on this, but very grateful for your time. Thanks, Berkay. That's Berkay Ozcan coming to us. Right, coming up next, we are going to be discussing what's happening with Britain's fugitives, all these missing people skipping court. That's coming up just after this.
Listen live or catch up on shows you might have missed using the Times Radio app for iOS or Android.
AI is only as powerful as the platform it's built into. That's why it's no surprise that more than 85% of the Fortune 500 use the ServiceNow AI platform. While other platforms duct tape tools together, ServiceNow seamlessly unifies people, data, workflows, and AI, connecting every corner of your business. And with AI agents working together autonomously, anyone in any department can focus on the work that matters most. Learn how ServiceNow puts AI to work for people at servicenow.co.uk.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker, this is Times Radio.
Welcome back. Now, a Channel 4 Dispatches investigation has revealed how the justice system is allowing thousands of people to simply dodge court appearances. Hunting Britain's Fugitives airs tonight on Channel 4 at 8 o'clock. It's really fascinating but very worrying as well. It's found that nearly 60,000 criminal suspects dodged court appearances in England and Wales last year.
Skipping court is a criminal offence. When someone doesn't show up to their court date, a judge can issue something called a failure to appear warrant for their arrest. Through Freedom of Information requests, I've discovered a shocking trend. Police in England and Wales received nearly 60,000 failure to appear warrants in 2025, up almost 50% from 2020. That's potentially nearly 60,000 criminals who've simply opted to skip court. In Crown Court specifically, where the most serious cases are heard, like murder, grievous bodily harm, and rape, the number of failure to appear warrants has more than doubled.
That's the voice of Matt Shea, who presents Hunting Britain's Fugitives. And Matt joins us now. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. Now, talk to us about these numbers. How many people are on the run? I mean, were you shocked by these figures? I'm shocked listening to them.
Yeah, it's a hugely surprising figure. The figure that you just heard, 60,000 increase in failure to appear warrants since 2020. That's a 50% increase. But there's also another figure we uncovered through Freedom of Information requests, which is that there are currently 30,000 outstanding failure to appear warrants. Several thousands of those date back, many, many years. What that means is that there are potentially tens of thousands of criminals who are on the run and have not been caught. And this number is hugely rising. And I think it's sort of a symptom, of what's going on in our justice system, a symptom that previously we didn't know about. But when you see the figures, it is really shocking.
It is. And look, I think what a lot of people will be quite surprised about, and I was as well, is, you're talking about really serious crimes, as we just heard in that clip: violent crime, knife crime, sexual assaults, rape. And if people just don't turn up to court, I would imagine that the authorities would be out trying to track them down, knocking on doors, sort of hunting them down. What's going on, Matt?
I mean, it's a really good question. I think we all assume that you can't just skip trial, right? And we can get into the reasons as to why people are skipping trial in a bit. I mean, it really comes down to, I think, the crisis in the justice system, the backlog of court cases, the lack of spaces in prison, all combined to make it so that people's trials are so far in the future now. Some people are being told they won't be heard in court till 2030. That with your trials so far in the future, a lot of criminals are thinking, why not go on the run? It feels like, why even bother with my trial? But then, of course, there is this question of, why are the police not going after them and catching them? Well, it could be that the police are deprioritizing this, because let's say they do go and catch someone, They bring them back. Well, their trial's not for another 3 years, potentially.
Right.
So where are they going to put them? There's no place in prison. They're going to have a bail hearing every 6 months anyway, because they're innocent until presumed guilty. So this is all what happens when you have this corrosive delay in our justice system.
And it really, it's such a kind of colourful demonstration of how broken the criminal justice system is. And this has happened under successive governments. And I was really interested that you speak to a range of really interesting people in this documentary. One of them is Alex Chalk, who was the former Justice Secretary, and he's quite open with you. Tell us about what he said to you.
Well, yes, so he was the Justice Secretary under Rishi Sunak, and he sort of says that he's the first one to sound the alarm bells about this impending crisis in the justice system, the backlog of court cases, caused by the COVID pandemic, but also by chronic underfunding of the court system, the lack of prison spaces, etc. He said that fell on deaf ears, and it actually led to a row between him and Rishi Sunak. Now, the question he's asking is whether the situation is recoverable at all. He used the terms death rattle to refer to the justice system, to what we've found about the UK justice system in these figures. So, it puts Labour in a very difficult position, which is why you're now hearing all this talk of scrapping jury trials, because something needs to be done. This is a crisis.
Do you think scrapping jury trials would help?
Well, it's very controversial, right? Especially when the issue here is the erosion of faith in the justice system, right? And to scrap jury trials further erodes that faith, arguably, right? The problem is that criminals aren't respecting the justice system, victims are not getting justice and therefore not respecting the justice system. Why would we do something that could be solved in other ways by, for example, funding for more courts, more training,
sitting
more
days and things like that?
Exactly. That said, there are certain very complicated, fraud cases where there is an argument that, a jury isn't necessary for them and may not even understand the complexities of those cases.
And look, I find it fascinating that you were able to track down some of these people when obviously the police or the criminal justice system can. But what were these people like, and what did they say to you when you caught up with them, and what were their reasons for skipping court, and were they just getting on with their daily lives okay, just having skipped court?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that we tracked down these criminals, because I think that's one reason everyone should watch this film, which comes out tonight at 8 p.m. on Channel 4, by the way, because it's not just about these freedom of information figures. We actually go and find the most wanted criminals in the UK, and it's a lot easier than you'd think. We end up speaking to 5 of them, including one of the National Crime Agency's most wanted criminals. All of them seem to share the same perception, which is that justice is now optional, that it is essentially your choice whether you go to your trial or not.
Wow. Justice is optional.
Exactly. And look, most of us will never encounter statistically the justice system. Most of us are not victims of crimes. But if you are, you need the justice system to be functioning. We all assume it does, right? But one of the people I speak to in this film is Kira Ryan. She's the sister of a man called Jack Ryan, who was killed by a driver years ago. This person was going twice the speed limit. He was found guilty in his absence of death by dangerous driving. He fled the country. And Kira Ryan, Jack Ryan's sister, previously had so much faith in the UK justice system. To her, that's all gone because, this person has not faced justice. But the most infuriating thing is that the man, Rashid Ali, who was accused of this crime, was found guilty in his absence, not only was he able to flee, but we found through his social media that he appeared to have come back to the UK while there was a warrant out for his arrest and ate in a restaurant in Mayfair. So you can imagine how infuriating that is. And, we assume that can't happen. We assume there's some kind of system in place to stop that happening. But increasingly, it seems that that's not the case.
Gosh, honestly, Matt, what an eye-opening piece of work you've done. This feels like it's essential viewing for if you care about the criminal justice system, and I hope that ministers and civil servants and advisors in the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice are going to watch this. Thank you so much for your time, Matt. Fascinating there. That's Matt Shea, who presents Hunting Britain's Fugitives. That's on Channel 4 tonight. at 8 o'clock. Matt said, oh, this is all about people avoiding 3 points for speeding. It's really not, Matt. It's clearly really, really serious offences, including that guy who killed somebody by dangerous driving. Well, look, plenty more to come. Stay tuned.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio. It starts with listening.
Good afternoon. It's just gone 3 o'clock. You're listening to Aisha Hazarika. This is Times Radio. We've got one more hour. I've got some cracking guests, including my peer-to-peer guest, Lord Burns, the former chair of Ofcom and Channel 4. But first, let's catch up with Ellie J for all the latest news.
Thanks, Aisha. Good afternoon. The Prime Minister has condemned Russia after 2 drones hit a Romanian apartment block. One crashed into a block of flats in the eastern city of Galați, injuring 2 people. Russia is denying there's evidence it was theirs, and it's not clear if it was an accidental or deliberate strike. NATO's called it reckless and has promised to strengthen defences. Military analyst Sean Bell says a stronger response is needed.
It's not enough for NATO to simply say we've crossed a line, or, as John Healey said, we're watching you. Ultimately, NATO is going to have to stand up eventually because Russia will keep pushing.
2 brothers accused of assaulting a male police officer at Manchester Airport in July 2024 won't face a 3rd trial. 2 juries failed to reach verdicts. Amer Anwar is Mohammed Fahir Ahmad's and Mohammed Ahmad's lawyer.
The position of the 2 brothers has always been that they acted in self-defence. Social media posts viewed by millions created a highly prejudicial atmosphere in which a lynch mob mentality that was racist, anti-Muslim, called for deportation.
21-year-old Mohammed Fahir Ahmad will be sentenced next month for assaulting 2 other officers during the same incident in July 2024. 3 people have died after falling from a block of flats in South London. Police are treating the deaths of a man, woman and child in Elephant and Castle on Wednesday morning as unexpected. No one else is hurt. The Home Office will roll out AI facial recognition technology to estimate the age of asylum seekers claiming to be children. Unaccompanied children are treated differently to adults, and being under 18 can sometimes have an impact on whether asylum is granted. An IT company based in Essex has been awarded a contract worth £322,000 for the technology. Kent County Council says it will step up public scrutiny of water supply, quality and infrastructure following a series of water outages in recent days. People in parts of the country are being warned that disruption to their supply could continue over the weekend. South East Water said its reservoirs have reached a critical level after 8,000 properties in Whitstable were left without running water. Jeff Higgins relies on water for his jam-making business. He says a lack of production since Tuesday has already cost him up to £15,000.
We've had the team redirected to do packing and labelling, things that we could do. We've now run out of things to do. We can't do anything about it. You know, they can't take their holidays because they're already allocated, so we have to pay them and they have to go home.
And King's College Hospital in London has opened the UK's first fully equipped outdoor intensive care ward. Doctors and nurses will be able to treat patients with life-threatening conditions in a rooftop garden designed to accelerate recovery. Up to 6 patients at a time can be cared for in the garden, which opened above the hospital's critical care unit. For a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on any podcast platform.
Across the UK. On DAB Digital Radio, on the free Times Radio app, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Welcome back to the final hour of the show. Thanks for all of your excellent comments and observations. Lots of you messaging in about that chat we had about the birth rate. Christine makes the point it could also be to do with the publicity about the terrible state of maternity care in the UK. That could be putting women off. Many of the recent stories revealed in the inquiries have been harrowing. I think that is a good point. Lots of you, though, messaging in saying maybe this is a good thing for the country in terms of the population going down, in terms of pressures on public services and housing. David says, are we really surprised? Because if you look at how education and young people's careers are going, and we're going to be talking about that in these NEETs in just a moment, and the pressures on young people to be able to get a good job. James says it's the cost of living and economic uncertainty which has put off many of us from having children. If only I had met someone like you and appealed to you too. Best wishes from a respectful admirer. Oh, James, that's so sweet. Who knows? Maybe if we'd had a sliding doors moment many, many years ago. And Susie says it would be interesting to know what the same-sex relationship figures are. IVF is expensive and couples may not be able to afford the increase, to increase the birth rate, which is a very, very good point. And Paul's messaged in about that really, I thought, brilliant but alarming conversation about people skipping trial. And Paul says, Aisha, justice is optional, and even when people do go through the system, they often get let off for the most horrendous crimes. He's talked about that awful case this week about the teen boys, and today these brothers not facing justice, although I think they are facing justice for some other attacks involving that day. But Paul says shoplifting is basically legal in many towns and cities. Totally agree with that. 2-tier and optional, very sad times. I do agree with that. Right, now let's now focus on this really big... We've had a lot of political essays this week, but not that many, in my humble opinion, chunky kind of prescription for the problems facing this country. But one person that has really put his shoulder to the wheel is Alan Milburn. I think his report, and I think he has done brilliant work, and I hope that politicians, experts, public bodies, all of us will really digest this important piece of work he has done. He was on Health Times Radio, and he's done this big piece of work looking at why 1 million young people now fit into this category called NEET. They're between 16 and 24. They're not in education, employment or training, and that is despite 84% of them saying that they want to be. So it's not like all of them are these lazy, weak, pathetic snowflakes that don't want to work. 84% of them say they do. And according to Alan Milburn's review, the largest hurdles facing young people list like the death of the Saturday job, a fall in apprenticeships, and policy decisions which have made businesses less able and less inclined to hire people. Let's listen to what he said to Times Radio yesterday.
Far too many of the young people I talk to feel like they're putting in an effort but not getting a reward, and it's a visceral thing. Honestly, I've never known anything like it as I've gone around the country talking to people, whether employers, young people, colleges, parents, grandparents. People are really worried about the future of the next generation, so we've got to make it a priority to put that right. We just can't afford to have a whole generation laid to waste.
Well, let's now discuss this with Fraser Nelson, who is a regular Times columnist, but Fraser also did a really fascinating documentary looking into benefits and people who've been on benefits trying to get back into the workplace. He did that for Channel 4, and if you are interested in this issue, I really do recommend you watch that, because it really touches on a lot of the issues that Alan Milburn is speaking to. Fraser, welcome to the show.
Hi, Asia.
What's your biggest takeaway from what Alan Milburn's done so far?
Well, this is the most comprehensive report that I've seen in my 25 years covering politics. Nothing has come close to its quality, to its depth, the unsparing way that it takes apart the failures of the government in protecting those it's supposed to look after. But what jumps out at me, oddly, isn't anything in the report. It's not even what Alan Milburn said. It's the reaction. Across parties, we can see something approaching a consensus that what Milburn is saying is right and that we need fundamental reform. Pick up The Guardian today and you've got Polly Toynbee saying we should be discarding what Blair says but reading every word of Milburn. And this is for a report which is more radical than anything the Tories have ever produced. So Milburn could have been partisan in this. He could have said, look, I'm going to give Keir Starmer a weapon to prod to the Tories with. I could attack the SNP for their reforms, leading to even worse results. But instead, he hasn't really approached it like a Labour partisan here. He's been talking to other parties. And we could be about to approach that very rare moment in politics where we might be able to get cross-party consensus on the need for radical reform of the welfare state.
I couldn't agree more, Fraser. I mean, watching his interviews on Thursday morning, it was a sort of breath of fresh air to see somebody who was well briefed, made an emotional connection with the subject, took a nuanced view and a non-tribal, non-partisan view. It was very encouraging. So in terms of what some of the solutions might be, I mean, he's still going to do another piece of work on this, but what do you think are some early sort of runners and riders in terms of actual policy ideas?
Well, of course, this is the funny thing about politics. You can get cross-party consensus on the problems, but as soon as the solutions come over, that's where they start to differ. Now, reading Milburn's report, of course, he says, in terms here, that you need to make it easier and less risky for employers to hire young people. That, of course, points to things like the minimum wage and the national insurance contributions. He was asked many times in the press conference about the minimum wage, which obviously he seems to think is set at a rate which is stopping people entering the jobs market. It's difficult to see him really proposing that it is cut, but he might have come up with some kind of compromise. But the kind of areas I think of cross-party consensus should just be a change in the way in how we see the welfare state, rather than judge it by its intentions, rather than judge it by how many schemes we're putting in, how much money we're spending, looking at the results instead. Like, for example, the report shows that for special needs, we're spending a lot of money on this. It's absolutely surging the bill. Now, I'm a son of a special needs teacher. I wouldn't mind this if the actual outcome for special needs kids was getting closer to those who aren't special needs. That's the idea. But instead, we see something like 59% of girls and 39% of boys are on welfare in their late 20s if they were special needs at school. Now, when you see that, whether you're left or right, unionist or nationalist, populist or centrist, you will think something is going very badly wrong there. And that the money and the attention that's intended to help kids isn't working. So if we can move politics from being an intentions-based to actually joining more of these dots, to seeing where they lead, to making results-based, then we've got the chance of ushering in a new form of debate. Because all the political incentives are towards basically arguing about this, trying to point score. If this consensus emerges around judging this by the results, that might be a new way, and you might be able to depoliticize it, as you have done in Sweden and even in America.
I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Fraser, in the sense that, as you say, there's consensus on the diagnosis, but there will be partisanship around the prescription. And we're already seeing that. I mean, I discussed this on TV on Thursday. My timeline is already full of people saying, you're just an evil capitalist Tory scum person who just wants to take away benefits from people. So you can already see that debate being framed. And that was the kind of, that there was the whole welfare debacle last year. How is any government going to take this forward and not, hit the same buffers they did last time when they tried to reform welfare?
Well, you can look around the globe. You can look around the Clinton-Gingrich reforms in America. That was a bipartisanship which really drove forward advances. Of course, the welfare state itself, Beveridge was a liberal commissioned by Churchill, report implemented by Labour. That was cross-party consensus. Even at the end of the Blair years, you had James Purnell's welfare reform was basically endorsed by Chris Grayling, his opposite number. So we have, as a country, several times before, come up with bipartisan appeal. Now, that's not to say you reduce controversy. People are always going to be against it. But if you manage to create a multi-party support for a reform agenda, you can push it through. I mean, right now, nobody who intends to govern Britain doesn't want this to be fixed. Nobody does govern Britain wants to delay the results of what they should be doing. So I do think we can look around the country right now. Look at America, for example. The American Enterprise Institute, which is quite a conservative think tank, is doing a joint venture with the Brookings Institute, a left-wing think tank, about welfare to work. So all around the world right now, we can see people coming together on the basic notion that we need a working state rather than a welfare state, that social inclusion matters, that having people in the workplace matters, and that giving people money and having them outside of the economy and society is not a good thing. Now, these are basics. I do think it's possible to build a consensus, and I wonder if the Milburn report might be the moment where the parties come together.
And just to pick up on one other point, which is an important one as well, is that there are a lot of young people who really, really do want to get into work, and they are working really hard. I was on a TV show on Thursday morning and met 3 young people they had in the studio. They all had done really, really well at university and college. They had put in hundreds of applications between them, Fraser, often not even getting an answer back. One of the young man had just started at an accountancy firm only because he'd got on the BBC talking about how many times he'd made applications and hadn't heard anything back, and he put it on his LinkedIn and somebody got in contact. What about how, the kids who are working really, really hard, and Alan Milburn does talk about that as well. He talks about how businesses have got a responsibility as well to make the application processes easier, just using AI to do all the sifting, giving feedback to people, at least giving kids a response to say they haven't got the job. What do you think about that?
Oh, yeah, it's a major issue. I mean, this is a world of problems here. Here we're talking about basically a graduate employment, rather than the needs. But the graduate employment market is huge. I have a friend of mine, her son has done 267 applications. And his last one, he was rejected because he didn't show enough emotional response to the AI machine that was interviewing him. I mean, these stories are absolutely everywhere now, and they are shocking. Companies are using AI kind of for the first time in these applications. They're obviously getting it wrong. But the heartbreaking process for these kids, making, as you say, Isha, literally hundreds of applications. It is mind-blowing. It speaks to the graduate market right now. Of course, in my humble opinion, extra regulation, extra tax does not help this. I'd rather it went the other way. But it could well be that the graduates start not hiring, going to the corporates. They might be thinking of other routes. The corporates themselves might be making a bit of a mistake here, and they might start to be the ones who end up not getting quality applicants because the applicants are finding other routes. So I'm hoping, this is a bad time to be a graduate job. There's lots of fears that AI is going to obliviate the need for lower-end entry-level jobs. So a lot of companies simply aren't recruiting as much as they did. I hope that that's going to change. But I do think that, we're talking a lot about the welfare state, what does work and what doesn't. The fundamental part of this is what the prospects are like for young people. If you are talking about horrific, like 300 application style jobs, if you're looking at low paid jobs where you never really escape the minimum wage, then you're looking at something quite important, the burning of the ladder that everybody used to think was waiting for them if they did the right thing in society. Now that's happening at the bottom level of society. It's happening for graduate jobs. It's really significant. So I think there's a lot more to this story than simply government institutions and their failure. I mean, that's a big part of it.
Absolutely.
But what companies do, another big part.
Absolutely, and it actually loops back to our previous conversation we were having about the declining birth rate as well. When you kind of join up all the dots, it's all part of a very interesting, bigger picture. Fraser, thank you so much for your time. That was a brilliant, fascinating conversation. That's Fraser Nelson, Times columnist. And do, if you got the time, catch up on Fraser's documentary on the benefit system. It's really illuminating. Right, coming up next, it's my peer-to-peer guest, and it's Lord Burns, Terry Burns, former chair of Channel 4 and Ofcom. He's joined me just after this.
Wake up to Britain's brightest business bulletins with Times Radio business correspondent Dominic O'Connell.
For the latest business news and what it means for your money, join me, Dominic O'Connell, throughout breakfast every morning from 6.
Get expert insight and analysis in one essential breakfast briefing. Business Bulletins with Times Radio business correspondent Dominic O'Connell on Times Radio. It's the business.
Sail through the heart of historic cities and unforgettable scenery with Viking. Unpack once and get closer to iconic landmarks, local life, and cultural treasures. Because when you experience Europe on a Viking longship, you'll spend less time getting there and more time being there. Learn more at Viking.com. Viking, exploring the world in comfort.
At the third stroke, the time from BT will be 11 o'clock.
Today, BT will protect UK businesses and homes from 4 million cyber threats. So UK businesses can send 11 million order updates, pour 34 million lattes, and come off mute 200 million times without disruption.
At the third stroke, the time from BT will be brilliant.
BT Business, protecting more businesses than any other network. Point topic data to Q4 2025. To verify, see bt.com/claims.
The Story, the award-winning daily news podcast from The Times. Listen in the Times Radio app or wherever you get your podcasts. Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker, this is Times Radio.
Peer to Peer with Aisha Hazarika on Times Radio.
Welcome back now. It's that time of the week where I get to have a wee chat with some of the really interesting people I sit alongside on the red benches of the House of Lords. And this week, I'm delighted to be joined by Lord Burns, Terry Burns, who's had a fascinating life and career, a real story of social mobility. The son of a coal miner, Terry went on to have a very successful career as an economist and a civil servant. He's also led many big, well-known organisations in a career spanning 5 decades. He served as the chair of the National Lottery, Marks and Spencer's, Pearson, Welsh Water and the Royal Academy of Music, to name a few. He spent 20 years as a civil servant, becoming permanent secretary to the Treasury, a role he held for nearly a decade. He became a crossbench life peer in 1998, and in 2010 he was the chair of Channel 4, and he also became the chair of Ofcom between 2018 and 2020. A real illustrious career. Lord Burns, Terry, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. It's very nice to be here.
Take us back to your kind of upbringing, because I feel like what a story of social mobility that is. I mean, how do you go from being the son of a coal miner to this kind of elevated, high status person? Your parents must have been dead proud of you.
Well, it is slightly extraordinary. As you say, I was born in a mining village in the northeast of England, in Durham. Somewhere halfway between Durham and Sunderland. Both my grandfathers were miners, and actually my father wasn't so much as a miner, he was a colliery blacksmith. He worked in the colliery all his life. My parents were interested in politics. I went to Manchester University to do politics and modern history. I had to do economics in the first year, and I found that I enjoyed that a lot. And on my graduation, it happened that my tutor had been appointed to the London Business School as professor, and he asked me to go and be his research assistant. So, a whole series of really fortunate coincidences. And he put me to work working on building a computer model of the British economy back. So this is 60 years ago, 1966. Wow. And we did this for about 15 years. We produced forecasts in the Sunday Times 3 times a year. And lo and behold, when I was 35, in late 1979, Geoffrey Howe asked me to become Chief Economic Advisor to the Treasury. And I started there in 1980. I went on a 4-year contract and stayed in that job for 11 years, and then was appointed Permanent Secretary to the Treasury. And I stayed there till the summer of 98 when I joined the House of Lords. So I've been in the House of Lords now for, 28 years or something.
Gosh, I've just had my second anniversary. I hope look at somebody like you with this incredible career. And look, you've had this fascinating career which has spanned so many different disciplines. There's so many things we could talk about, but I suppose what's interesting, I'd like to come to the Ofcom stuff in a moment, but just particularly your time at the Treasury. The country's facing a really difficult time at the moment in terms of geopolitics, but also people will argue that the sort of structures of the economy have been weakened for a long time since the global financial crash. What are your thoughts in terms of the sort of health of the UK economy right now, your assessment?
Well, first of all, I've got to say, when I joined the Treasury in January 1980, the conditions seem to be every bit as bad as they are today. We just had a period of high inflation. There was a lot of structural change going on, particularly with deindustrialization. At that time, we had a problem of an oil price that was too high rather than, in the UK. And sterling became very strong. So there were all kinds of problems. But as you say, and you rightly say, this is a very difficult environment that the government is facing. And all over the industrial world, we've seen growth rates since the financial crisis in 2007 to 8, being lower than they previously were. The UK is growing at sort of 1 to 1.5% a year compared to 2.5% through much of my working life. And this inevitably presents governments with challenges and trade-offs that are very difficult. And it means that some groups, their standard of living is not going to change very much. And it's also brought with it a huge fiscal problem. The combination of the monies that were spent on the banking crisis, the COVID crisis, the energy price crises, we've seen 2 of those now already, has given us a very high level of government borrowing. And it's also more expensive than it is in other countries. And therefore, we have slow growth and we have a fiscal position which means that government does not have a great deal of room for manoeuvre. And that is quite a challenging background. And there are a whole set of issues going ahead, which are also going to be very challenging.
And look, you've worked, have always been politically neutral. You were a very senior civil servant. You've, no doubt worked with different administrations. But with your kind of Treasury lens on the world, what do you think are the ingredients to boost growth? Do you, because many of my listeners and many commentators and just ordinary people feel we're in a situation we're highly taxed, we have low productivity, we feel that we're not getting great public services either. What is this? And everybody agrees that we need to grow the cake bigger and then everyone can have a bigger slice of it. But how do you do that? Does deregulation help boost growth? Would cutting taxes boost growth, or can you keep taxes where they are and still stimulate growth through things like investment in infrastructure? What are the secret ingredients, Terry?
Well, I think first, from my point of view, and being in the Treasury, the first thing is that you have to have financial stability, which means that the public finances have to be kept in order. You've got to avoid having interest rates at too high a level, and you've got to avoid, in a way, any sense that there are going to be a succession of crises. Stability is very important. Then you have to work on the two sides of, from a Treasury perspective, you're working on two sides of the economy. One is the tax side, one is the expenditure side. The tax system, I think, is badly in need of reform. It has some very curious marginal tax rates. The way that allowances work and are then withdrawn causes a lot of problems for people on middle type incomes. There's questions about whether the incentives for companies to invest are as strong as they should be. And the public expenditure side is just hugely difficult. It is a question, and I have argued this in the House of Lords. One of the things is we've got to be both realistic and we've got to be practical about what it is that can be doing, and avoid doing things which destabilise matters even further. And
when you say stability, do you think changing prime ministers at the rate that we have done has hindered that stability? And do you think a change of prime minister would add, and chancellor would add to further instability now?
Well, as you say, I'm not, this is not my world, the world of politics. But I think when people talk about wanting to change prime ministers, I think they underestimate just the difficult background that we face and think that somehow or other there is some magic way of jumping out of this. The history of changing prime ministers in the middle of parliaments is pretty mixed. I think, if I have any criticism of the present government, it is really that when they came into office, they did not emphasise the precarious state that the public finances were already in. The Economic Affairs Committee in the House of Lords, which I sit on regularly, had a report before the election about some of these issues that were facing the country in terms of how to pay for net zero, how to pay for increased defense spending, how to cope with the aging population and the decline of the birth rate. So it was clear to me that there were a number of problems, and they were going to be very difficult. And I think facing up to that is much more important than trying to change leaders and think at this point that is going to make the world of difference.
And look, just before I let you go and we head off to the news, I just want to ask you, you've been in the media as well. You were the chair of Channel 4 and the chair of Ofcom, and you know that we've been debating a lot of these issues in the House of Lords, where it's, media regulation is not just traditional media in the way that you and I know it in terms of just the channels or the radio. It is social media now. It is the internet. There is so much regulation that needs to be done online, whether it's harming young people, social media, pornography, and there is a feeling that Ofcom is just not robust enough or equipped to deal with the sort of wild west that is online. What do you think about that?
Well, when I see this debate going on, I mean, I have a natural defensive, in a sense, approach to the role of Ofcom, because Ofcom does basically what Parliament asks it to do. And I don't think there is any significant way in this broad range of issues that Ofcom are not doing what Parliament has asked them to do. The key issue, of course, in the internet harms thing was, well, there were two aspects. One was to make sure that those things which are illegal in real life are also illegal on the internet. The second issue was the protection of young people. And protecting people against really bad content like pornography, etc., I think can be done. And I think Ofcom are already moving quite quickly on that. What is more difficult, I think, are some of these social media issues, because by nature, I have grandchildren of the age that this covers, and so I watch them in the way that they use it. It's very easy to reach for things like for bans, and the question is, does that really deal with the underlying problem about social media, whereby it is the companies who have these devices in to try to keep people online, this infinite scrolling, the way in which they spend too much of their time, there should be natural breaks maybe. A ban, simple bans, I think we will find quite quickly are evaded by one way or another, even by the parents themselves who want, look at the number of people who see out with their little children and they hand them their phones in order to stop them crying. It is very difficult to run bans and to really do it effectively. And I feel much more aligned with those who wish to try to persuade the companies that those things which are really harmful to children, particularly the length of time they can be on social media, is restricted. And particularly the way in which the reward system encourages people down the wrong channel. Now, that's a much more difficult thing to do. And it will take some time to pull off. But Parliament has got to face, you and I have sat there and watched these debates. When it comes to the practicality of things like bans and where does the problem really lie, it becomes quite difficult to focus in to things that will have an effect without actually making young people very unhappy that they can't do some things that they want to do, but in a more balanced way.
Well, look, Terry, I could speak to you for hours. There's so many things to cover in your amazing, amazing career. What a life you've had, what a career you've had.
I'm very fortunate.
Well, it's a great story, and I think there's lots that we could learn from you across your many different disciplines. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us.
Great pleasure.
That's Terry Burns, Lord Burns there. What incredible, son of a coal miner. That is what story of social mobility. Right, coming up next, it's our politics panel, but it's just gone 5:34. Let's catch up with Ellie J for all the latest headlines.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, Aisha. Good afternoon. The Prime Minister says the UK stands with Romania after 2 people were injured when a drone crashed into a block of flats in the eastern region of Galatz, near the Ukrainian border. Sir Keir Starmer's called it a serious violation of NATO airspace. NATO has vowed to bolster its defences and called the actions reckless. Russia has denied involvement. Here's Michael Evans, former defence editor of The Times, speaking to Times Radio.
It's not the first time, but what makes this more serious is that this wasn't a surveillance drone that happened to get out of direction and hit an apartment block. This was a weapon system, a drone with explosives on board. So it clearly did a lot more damage than it would have done if it had not been armed.
2 brothers accused of assaulting police at Manchester Airport will not face a third retrial. Mohammed Fahir Ahmaz and Mohammed Ahmad from Rochdale both denied attacking a male officer in July 2024. Jurors had been unable to reach verdicts in 2 previous trials. People in parts of Kent are being warned that disruption to their water supply could continue over the weekend. Kent County Council says it will step up public scrutiny following a series of water outages. And King's College Hospital in London has opened the UK's first fully equipped outdoor intensive care ward. Doctors and nurses will be able to treat up to 6 patients with life-threatening conditions in a rooftop garden designed to accelerate recovery. And for a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on the Times Radio app.
This is Times Radio.
On day 3 of leftovers for lunch, have a day off. Switch it up with a double cheeseburger for $2.49 on the McDonald's Saver menu.
Leftovers left the chat.
Talk about Saver satisfaction. Served from 11 a.m. Price and participation may vary. Fees apply to delivery orders, subject to availability.
I thought that I had travelled. Then I crossed the icy sea. I thought I'd known the wild, till it appeared to me. I thought that I'd known wonder, then sailed beneath these skies. I thought I'd seen the world, until I opened my eyes. Change the way you see the world with HX Expeditions. Search Travel HX to discover more.
Wake up to a brighter breakfast with Rosie Wright and Callum MacDonald tomorrow morning from 6 on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker, this is Times Radio.
Welcome back. Now, for the rest of the show, we're going to kick back and chat politics with 2 great political thinkers, Anne McElvoy from Politico and Ava Santina Evans from Politics Joe. Hello, Anne. Hello, Ava.
Hey.
Now, Anne, I have to start with you because there's this terrible situation in Kent around Whitstable where, there's a nightmare with water shortages. Have you been affected?
We have. We actually just got water back this morning, which I have to say was it's been a bit, life in the 18th century here. We have spent 2 days actually getting buckets from the beach. In my case, not very far away, from the beach, I should say, to sort of slosh down the loos and things. We didn't have any running water. All the supermarkets were out of drinking water. Sort of really bad effect on the town also in terms of bars and restaurants and, all the things that people like to do when they're at seaside towns, all having to close up for a couple of days. So, yeah, I feel it's like the water companies are sort of in bad odour in these parts.
I love bad odour. And, of course, the time of year as well, and this absolute sweltering heat and suboptimal, to say the least.
Well, yeah, I swam yesterday, and then we all decided it would be a good idea if everybody had a separate bed, because who really wants to lie next to someone who's been in the Whitstable estuary?
Bit whiffy, generally.
Point underlying it, the communications have just been, well, what do you expect? You guys keep using a lot of water because it's been so hot. But that's not, if we're talking about critical infrastructure, and this is not the only place affected, of course. I've got severe localitis about it. But it goes all the way down the coast to Herne Bay and beyond and inland. And it happened recently again, didn't it? In Tunbridge Wells and around there. So, there is a big problem here. And it comes back to the infrastructure not being good enough and the maintenance in this from a pumping station, which I noticed everybody's passing over lightly and blaming the consumer for needing to drink water and have showers in the heat. I mean,
it's a bit
the way
rich
to go to the 21st century on this one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit rich to victim blame on this when actually, there's a lot. And you're so right about critical infrastructure and building more reservoirs and water purification and all that kind of thing. Well, look, I'm very glad you've got your water back. Right, let's leave the issue of water and let's turn to the issue of essays, because it's been a bumper week for essays, has it not, Ava?
Yes, it has. And actually very timely with what Anne was just, talking about there with what's going on with the water problem in Whitstable, because that's exactly what Andy Burnham has been writing in his response to Tony Blair. He's been talking about neoliberalism and selling off public assets and how we need to get control of, in so many words, de facto. He wasn't exactly writing about Whitstable, but I'm sure it will come into his future speeches this week after hearing this on Times Radio. But, he's been talking about getting better public control, something that we haven't had in this country for a good 20 or 30 years, and was stretching right back until Thatcher. But that was his response to Tony Blair, to his, I think it was a 5,500 word essay that he released on Us this past week. Everyone was very excited about it because there was quite a dearth of news, as it was a hot May week with no Parliament. So it certainly has kept going, hasn't it? And the number of essays it kind of triggered, and from largely men with pent up essays in them.
Yes, that's true. There's no shortage of essays. That's definitely something in which we have super abundance. But I thought it was really interesting. I don't know if you had the same feeling, Aisha, knowing the Labour Party. It's so easily triggerable in all the right places. It's like Tony Blair, hops on the scene, does a pretty sort of challenging but a fairly conventional, just sort of right of centre, free market oriented. But I think it wasn't only that. I think he really did mean that his party and social democratic parties were in danger of losing their connection, to sort of changes in technology, changes in society, etc. And it, as you say, it just triggered this absolute avalanche. At the same time, he said, well, it's not about individual politicians, it's about the policies, which reminded me of poor old Tony Benn in his day talking about the issues. So it wasn't about the people, it was about the issues. Well, I mean, actually, as it turns out, Tony Blair can always, as an individual, trigger this massive response pretty much for just saying what's been in plain sight that he's believed for a long time.
And look, Ava, what do you think the reaction has been? I mean, I think what's so fascinating about it is that, I think Tony Blair remains, whatever you think of him, his ability to communicate and his conviction in his own, messaging when he went out and did all his interviews. He makes some very compelling points, and I think lots of people would agree about, the government, not having a sense of sort of mission and direction, which we've all talked about for a long time. What I was quite struck by, though, as a Labour person, was even people who are real die-hard Tony fans were really not happy about this intervention, Ava.
Yes, and I was going to say it depends on who you speak to in the party, but because they all had a different interpretation of it. I spoke to one lord this week who was particularly upset at Tony Blair having sort of sneaked in de facto sort of little winks and nods at AI. And obviously his institute is very involved in AI and its potential rollout and the legislation around it. So they told me they thought it was just an advert for his own business. If you speak to a soft left MP, they were a bit upset because there was a little bit of criticism for the government, who Tony Blair had said was running a soft left agenda. And they said, well, that seems pejorative. I don't know why he's being critical of us. And then if you were on the more hard left of the party, you were also upset because
it was Tony Blair.
Because it was Tony Blair, and also he'd said, I can't remember the exact verb that he'd used, but it was a rather discouraging Corbyn bit of slander, saying that the party had been stuck in Corbyn politics for a number of years, and that's why Starmer hadn't been prepared for government. So there was a lot of upset and critique across.
There was something for everyone.
There was.
And what do you make of the response? Because I mean, I think what's fascinating is lots of people outside the Labour Party, particularly lots of quite centrist One Nation Tories, have said to me, this is the best thing I've ever read. And lots of Labour people who actually do quite like Tony Blair and kind of very proud of Tony Blair have just been really quite grumpy about it.
But maybe that's exactly what he's pointing out, that the party, including those, a lot of people, are just not entirely fair. I mean, I spoke with Jack Straw, who gave a very robust defence of the speech. I spoke to a senior member of Cabinet who said they feared a bit, like as Eva was just describing, these antibodies, that's what the immediate response would be, but felt that this was motivational, as this person put it. So I think it's not only true that everyone in Labour, including the old Blairites, didn't like it. Some people argue about the timing of it, but if not now, when?
And what do you make about the timing?
Well, I mean, I think he's actually saying that the Blairites got stuck as well. I think that's a very fair point, that they did this kind of got stuck in these were our glory days, not looking into a society that's moved on, and AI certainly plays a role there. The one thing, a piece of advice I'd maybe been, if I'd thought to ask me, which you wouldn't, would be to say, like, if you do have interests in your foundation, absolutely, as I was pointing out, with David and Larry Ellison, maybe you should just say it, say it out there, put it out there and say, however, this is what I've come to think about AI, rather than letting other people out you for that aspect of what he does at the Institute.
And look, Ava, what do you think about the timing of this? Do you think because look, he has said that he's been wanting to say this for a while. He's held back. I mean, certainly when I've interviewed him over the recent years, he's quite cautious about what he says. He did a big event, we'll all remember a couple of years ago, where he kind of interviewed Keir Starmer. It was very much seen as him anointing Keir Starmer. Do you think he's done it now because is he doing this because he senses that there is going to be change, so this is the time to influence the conversation? Or has he done this to shore up Keir Starmer, to send a message out to people going, hang on a minute, don't just change the leader when you don't really know what the policy change is?
I think the essay is really in the eye of the beholder, because you could suggest that actually he was trying to shore up Keir Starmer because he wasn't derogatory about his personality. I think there's a line in there, so I'm going to butcher it. I'm not quite the essayist as Tony Blair, but it was something on the lines of, it's not his personality that's the problem. This is more about a battle for the soul of the party. So you could say that perhaps he's batting for Starmer there, or the other side of it is, well, look, we could be potentially facing a leadership challenge with Wes Streeting and Andy Burnham potentially about to face off. So is he suggesting that Labour needs to have an entire, rethink about who's leading it and where and, what policies they're going to have, and Starmer therefore isn't working? It was rather subjective, but maybe this is because I'm coming at it from an English literature degree perspective. And so, everything is interpretable, isn't it?
And what do you think about the timing, the motivation?
I think the motivation was to say that this contest, in whoever he sort of favours or doesn't, and I don't think he particularly favours anyone in the field. I think his relationship with Keir Starmer has kind of declined since that early. It was seen as a bit of a benediction, but I don't think Keir Starmer liked that, and I think the direction of travel, certainly on a lot of economic policy, has not delighted Tony Blair either. But I like the idea, and I think it's quite funny that Eva rightly highlights it, that you say, do you know what, Aisha? It's not your personality that's the problem. I think there's a word for that in studies where you say it's not this, but actually your attention is, it's not your fault, is it? It's a bit...
It's not me, it's you, it's really not.
Oh, God, I'm so sorry. But no, I think the underlying message was, I suppose he would like another candidate, but there may not be another candidate. Does he, his latest person to receive a bit of a benediction in an on-stage interview with Shabana Mahmood, but she feels quite far out from being at the moment a credible choice of the Labour Party. But I think that's really what he meant, to partly take Keir Starmer under his wing, say, you're getting the blame for a lot of. They do feel that Starmer government was very, very badly prepared, and that's something I hear a lot from people, close to Tony Blair, and I think that is his considered view that the reason they haven't got a vision and a sort of guiding ideas that they want to drive through government is that they sort of bust it on the way into office. They were so obsessed by getting elected. But you're right, the timing is intended to throw it into the light of this race. It's been prepared a very long time, this intervention. The timing was chosen, right? It wasn't just something like, oh no, it's on the grid, we got to get it out. So I think he does intend it precisely to provoke this kind of debate.
He definitely wants
the antibodies. He likes to lean into the argument. Subjective is definitely a word for it, but he would say, I'm subjective because I'm right, because I'm Tony Blair. Yeah. So that's that,
Yeah, he wants to, he wants to shape this debate. Yeah. And Ava, what is interesting is that one of the kind of the sort of consensus critique, certainly from people that have gone, I have to say, it has been quite male-dominated, the response. I wrote a piece last week for the Sunday Times saying I think it's fascinating that we're having a conversation about potential leadership challenge. It's 2016, and yet there are no women on the field yet again for the Labour Party, but that's like a separate thing. But what is interesting, the kind of consensus critique from whether you're like a Torsten Bell, who's a government loyalist, or whether you're an Andy Burnham who's trying to challenge Keir Starmer or a Wes Streeting, is this guy, a lot of respect for him, but he's got it wrong because he hasn't really addressed inequality or living standards, and that is the big thing driving politics right now. Do you think that is the kind of dominant mood in the Labour Party, and that conversation about inequality, that is more important to where the Labour Party is today?
Inequality comes up with pretty much everyone, every single MP that you speak to. And it's certainly that's something that they're drumming out when they're, taking to the streets of Makerfield. They're very much making the case for people have gotten poorer and we need to fix that. Wes Streeting has certainly cottoned on to that in the past couple of weeks or so. I think it was yesterday that he posted a campaign video almost, around bringing in a wealth tax. And I think, honestly, about 11 different backbenchers sent it to me. And I think the last one got a rather rude reply from me, which was, yes, I've seen it, because it was such a shock that he could be batting for that. It certainly does feel like that is where the mood is. Andy Burnham almost seemed that there was he seemed as if he had felt he was being condescended towards by Tony Blair's essay, because he said, well, the Blair government was brilliant, but we never actually did reverse any of the Thatcherism or the neoliberalism that landed us here in the first place. So they've definitely identified the problem, but no one's really talking about the policies, the solutions, or the upheaval that could come after this.
And Anne, in terms of the sort of direction of travel, it does feel, and as Ava said there, Wes Streeting, who would have been seen as the flag bearer for Blairism, he is tacking to the left and talking about a wealth tax, which lots of people on his side of politics have always been quite sniffy about. Do you think that the party is now inexorably kind of moving to the left?
And my worry about that intervention is that actually what he described it as a wealth tax that works. And that's the big problem, isn't it, with any wealth tax? When you dive down into it, he seems to be talking about something that the government had Rachel Reeves looked at and kind of juggled about with, which was basically capital gains tax. But I think rebranding it as a wealth tax is either, if you were of this view that at this point in Wes's campaign, he's just got to get as many people on board as possible. We know he couldn't get over the line with the numbers in week one. But I do feel that pressing the buttons of Labour MPs, who are often in large parts not the most kind of, tax and economic and finance literate people on the block. There certainly are some who are, but there are plenty who aren't. By using that phrase, it made it sound as if what he was going to do was going to find the wealthy people and tax them, which is a bit of a kind of Labour fantasy, right? That people just sit there just waiting, say, please have some more, or that they can't move, or they can't change how much they work, or they can't change their company structures. So you're into a whole world of pain if you go down that route. But really, I think he just meant he would bring back an idea for people who sell companies, who sell shares, try to make that divide as Labour tried to make it, and then kind of backed off it because it got too complicated about what's a working person. But, he would have exactly the same problems in defining it and in enacting it. I do think it is fair to say that equality, in the language of equality, was not in the Tony Blair speech or intervention. But I think fundamentally it's because he thinks first you have to grow your economy, then you can decide what you're going to do with it.
Well,
and there's a bit of a so-called soft left which wants to argue as if it's the other way around. But why didn't we tackle neoliberalism? I don't know. What depends what you mean. What is this thing? There's a lot of big words in this that I feel are used as triggers rather than actually having much substance about what the candidates mean.
But that, to me, feels at the kind of core of the torturous existential crisis that the Labour Party always has. I mean, I remember when I was working for Harriet Harman back in the day, and we commissioned a very good Professor Sir John Hills, who's a real expert on inequality, and we commissioned him. He's sadly passed away now. He's a brilliant academic and sort of thinker. And we did this big report into inequality. And what was fascinating is at the time we got a real telling off from the then number 10 saying you're not allowed to really talk about the gaps between rich and poor. That's not what the Labour Party is about. So at that point it was very much still, we don't care about the rich getting filthy rich as long as they pay their taxes, which was the famous Peter Mandelson quote. But now it's very much pivoted back, Ava, to we've got to be rooted in inequality. And it feels like that's the sort of heart of the battle in the Labour Party.
I mean, but arguably, even as Anne was talking there about, how Rachel Reeves increased the percentage points on capital gains, and there was a little bit about carried interest. This was all manifesto pledges that never came to fruition, or what was implemented was so incremental that it made, no market difference to the Treasury, or people just moved their money. But, if you think about Andy Burnham's economics are rooted in Blairism, they're rooted in PFIs. It was a real shock when he said that he didn't, he sort of bashed the bond markets, because you think, well, this is pretty much what all of your economic policy, particularly in Manchester, is rooted in, when you look at the Good Growth Fund. So I think the whole thing just sort of seems rather confused. And I think there is a line through here, which is buzzwords that are resonating with the public, like wealth tax, like inequality, and like destabilizing, sorry, I can't think of the word, dismantling neoliberalism. They sort of have cut through with the public. And I think they are being used rather more so as platitudes than as electoral strategies.
Kind of sort of performative rather than actually sort of meaning things. Well, I'm just going to read a couple of messages out before I bid you farewell. Jenny says, Jenny from Whitstable here, in regard to the water shortages, look online and you'll find someone has spray painted no water on the road coming into the town. It's rather apocalyptic. All the beach visitors had no access to loos, food or water, as all the cafes were closed, so it stinks of wee. That is from Jenny. Thank you, Jenny, for that. Don says, under Blair, the gap between rich and poor grew even greater. Nick says, all of these arguments are interesting, but we should have had them before the election. The gap between the richest and poorest has become massive. So whatever anyone says, that is unavoidable. And Sally says that's right. Andy Burnham drive yet more wealth creators and entrepreneurs out of the country. What a brilliant idea, as if Labour hasn't already driven enough out of them. Right, Anne and Ava, what a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time. And we're almost at the end of our show, but it's just gone 3:57. You're listening to Aisha Hazarika on Times Radio.
Rod Liddle on Times Radio.
I've got Blue Labour's Maurice Glassman on the battle for the soul of our governing party. And I'll review the week with Zoe Williams and Timandra Harkness, including two very, very quick things, electrons and whippets. I'll also be discussing ancient literature. Plus, Kenneth Law is accused of selling a poison linked to the deaths of more than 100 Britons. I'll talk to the sister of one of the Canadians' alleged victims.
Rod Liddle, tomorrow morning from 10 on Times Radio.
Listen to Times Radio on your DAB digital radio.
In a world of noise and uncertainty, IG is the investment platform that backs you. Take our flexible stocks ISA, which gives you the freedom to withdraw funds anytime and replace them in the same tax year, all without losing your £20,000 tax-free allowance. And if that's not enough, pay no commission on your stocks, shares and ETFs when you invest with IG. IG. Trade, invest, progress. Your capital's at risk. Other fees may apply. Tax treatment depends on individual circumstances and is subject to change.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker, this is Times Radio.
Welcome back. Well, we're almost at the end of the show. Simon gets the final word. He says Tony Blair strongly believes, and I agree with him, that there's no solution to inequality without economic growth. His intervention is motivated by a genuine concern that the Labour government has shifted far too much to the left, and that a future leadership contest given to be central, and it must be right. Fine. So basically, he's saying it shouldn't be going too far to the left. Well, look, that's it for me. Thank you so much for your company. So many great comments. Thanks to my production team, Musty, Emma, Jake, Joe, and Sam, and to Ryan, our technical producer, for keeping us